All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tempe City Council work study session. Item number 1 is call to order. Members of the public who attend the meeting physically are asked to maintain distance between other parties, and masks are optional for all attendees per City of Tempe policy. Alternatively, members of the public may attend the meeting virtually through Cisco WebEx events by visiting tempe.gov/councilmeetinginfo for more information. Council meetings can also be watched in real time via Cox Cable Channel 11 and at tempe.gov/tempe11. Item number 2 is call to the audience. The City Council welcomes public comment at this time for items listed under Section 3, issue review session items, and Section 5, committee of the whole items on this work study session agenda. There is a 3-minute time limit per speaker. I have a number of cards, I think 10 in total here, so I'm going to read these in the order that I received them, but I'm going to start also with the in-person speakers, and I know we have a couple of people virtually that I'll go to afterwards. So the first card I've got here is from Anicia Groves regarding item 3C. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address City Council.
Thank you. My name is Anicia Groves. I am a resident of Mesa, Arizona, but I'm here in solidarity with the directly impacted leadership of the People's Budget Tempe initiative. I also did live and work in Tempe for over 15 years. During that time, I completed a master's degree at ASU in counseling and interned with the City of Tempe Counseling and Social Services, and also worked in community mental health in the Tempe area as well. So those connections are still here. But after a brief time away for a counseling job in the Northwest Phoenix area, I returned and found it too expensive to live here. So hence I am on the border, but still spend much of my time in Tempe. So when the opportunity to support the People's Budget Tempe initiative came around, of course I jumped at the chance. So we're very happy that you've included our report in the last working session, and we see that you've been responsive to some of our recommendations, so thank you. We're happy to see funding recommended for mental health crisis response, mental health support for youth, and energy equity. Thank you very much for that. However, we have concerns about your recommendations to unfreeze 19 police officer positions and fund a massively expensive police overhire program. And these are not in alignment with your stated commitments to equity. Reimagining public safety does not mean removing badges and making police appear friendly on the surface. This unfreezing would expand the scope of the police department, which is the opposite of what has been demanded by the community and supported by our survey results. This would increase surveillance of already over-surveilled community members. It would pit neighbors against each other and attract privileged people to working directly with police to bring more harm to their neighbors. Community policing maintains the same system we already have in place, where the feeling of safety for privileged people is prioritized at the expense of actual safety for BIPOC, unsheltered people, people with mental health issues, etc. The people best equipped to serve those crisis response services are already in place in human services, so please move forward with funding those programs and expand them, and prioritize ensuring communities' basic needs are met. This is what leads to genuine safety. This is a key to preventing those crises from requiring a rapid response to begin with. So a good starting point for that would be to that end would be to fully fund all of the mental health programs that you've already agreed to, and then in addition, fund the Climate Justice and Indigenous Land Steward Program Specialist and other sustainability staff positions. They need personnel to be able to be successful. The backyard garden and food forest programs, particularly when more lower income areas in Tempe, such as La Victoria neighborhood, are becoming food deserts. And finally, the conversion to electric blowers and elimination of toxic chemicals used by parks maintenance workers who are currently at higher risk of cancer and hearing loss. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next up, we have John Burgess. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm John Burgess. I live at 4120 South Mill Avenue in Tempe, Arizona. I just wanted to say thank you all for supporting the mental health initiatives as well as the sustainability measures. But I would like to see in the fiscal budget, 2022-2023 budget, an increased importance of fully funding all these positions, especially the Climate Justice and Indigenous Land Steward Program, as well as other sustainability staffing positions. To fully fund the backyard garden and food forest programs, especially for low-income areas such as La Victoria, which are increasingly becoming food deserts. And to fully fund the conversion to electric blowers and the elimination of toxic chemicals used by park maintenance workers that are making them at more risk of cancer as well as hearing loss and other things. Public safety necessitates accessibility to good food, clean water, and shelter. So I ask that you fully fund sustainability initiatives for the upcoming 2022 to 23 fiscal budget. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Genevieve Vega. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Genevieve Vega. I'm a Tempe resident of... I just sat in the big chair in the middle automatically. I'm a Tempe resident, a former board member for the Tempe Community Council, a member of the Community Impact Committee. I also serve as a volunteer in several other nonprofit, civic, and professional organizations in Tempe. And I speak today regarding the agency review process that will be reported on for the next fiscal year. I've been a participant in agency review for the better part of a decade, and I find it to be one of the most rewarding and also one of the most difficult volunteer experiences that I've ever had. This year, as with every other year, there is far more need than there are funds to meet them. And this year, I feel like it's even greater, and we all see the macroeconomic impacts to our community. Generally speaking, the volunteers consistently feel the emotional labor of this process. If we could fully fund every one of these programs, we absolutely would. You'll hear about the amazing work of these volunteers, but it's important to recognize that the need is great enough that multiple providers of services is necessary because no one agency can accommodate all the needs in the city, nor should they. The challenge then becomes which agency is doing the best job of running their programs to help the most people. The reality is these are taxpayer dollars, and the agencies participating are required to produce quarterly reports on their stated outcomes to determine if their programs are effective and if they should continue to receive funds. There are many nonprofits helping Tempeans, and agency review is the only process in the city that is sound, transparent, and non-political to evaluate these nonprofit partners. Agencies outside of this process have no obligation to the city to be accountable to their outcomes. Though we do work to engage those providers as part of the continuum of care, their outcomes are not readily available or obvious. I know Council recently heard the Human Services Impact Report. I encourage you to consider the report on outcomes of these funded organizations. The level of funding for human services is very generous in Tempe, and the existing services provided by our own Human Services Department is critical to maintain. But human services cannot handle the rapidly increasing need on their own, and the partnerships between the city and these agencies is desperately needed to comprehensively meet the needs of our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next card I have here is from Selena Chichita. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Thank you. Hello again. My name is Selena Cheetah. I'm a long-term resident and homeowner in Tempe. I was so glad to hear you agree that middle school youth deserve ongoing mental health counselors, that the My Heart program should receive another specialist, and that we should staff the energy equity program. Very grateful. However, I was disappointed that you don't seem to hear us when we say this funding should come from the bloated police department and their extravagant supplemental requests that they've put forward this year. You requested staff perform a feasibility analysis for 4 additional supplementals totaling just over $515,000. This is the equivalent of half of 1% of Tempe PD's annual expenditures. It could be funded with virtually no adjustments by the police overhire program alone, not to mention the 19 officers. Instead, you seem to stand by police. Your staff seems to stand by police. They recommend massive cuts to the middle school mental health program and use contingency funds for the rest. You seem to think it can be a both and, but what we're trying to explain to you is that human services and police represent 2 competing approaches to community safety. Over 75% of arrests in Tempe are for low-level, nonviolent offenses such as trespassing, shoplifting, and petty theft, public disturbance. These behaviors that are labeled crime, they stem from lack of resources, housing, food, water, mental and physical health care. So to address these issues, we can either invest in getting people what they need so that they're not reaching a point of crisis, or we can invest in punishing people for resorting to criminalized measures to meet their needs and or removing them from society through incarceration. This first approach, the human services approach, it's preventative, it's humanizing. It produces safety for all people at the expense of no one. This second approach, the policing approach, the one that gets $100 million a year, it's reactive, it's dehumanizing, it does harm, it produces perceived safety for privileged people at the expense of people who are already struggling in our city, in our communities. So we're not just asking for you to temporarily invest in human services with rainy day funds. We're asking for you in the year 2022, after everything our communities have been through over the past several years, let alone the past several centuries, that you join us in reimagining public safety, that prioritize the health and dignity of all people, and make substantive changes to your investment through your budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next person we have is Raquel Higginbotham. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Raquel. I'm a longtime Tempe resident, ASU alumni, and a former educator. I'm also with the People's Budget Tempe. I just want to express concern about how much money is going towards the police budget, despite how many other categories desperately need that funding, like human services, sustainability, and housing. Tempe, your values are honor, integrity, loyalty, and dedication to our community. And when I think about the impact that policing has had on neighborhoods, especially Black and brown neighborhoods, I don't see integrity, loyalty, and dedication to our community. To police means to enforce, to control, to ensure order, all negative word choices with negative societal impact. And as a community member, a longtime community member, and an educator, one thing that I can ensure communities don't need is policing when they are in need of services. They need someone who understands compassion. They need community help. That's seen in things like food, housing, mental health help, and providing resources for those who are struggling, not policing them. You can't maintain order where help is needed. We did a youth town hall at a local community center that told me something I've already seen and experienced, that children are taught at an early age to obey the police and see them as their form of protection. These officers go into these classrooms and tell them they stop the bad guys like kidnappers. What kind of message is that when the bad guys that they wind up seeing are locals who are trying to sleep in a park because they're houseless? Locals who are having a mental health crisis and no one can properly assist them. Locals who shoplift because they saw no pandemic relief. These officers come to these kids' schools to teach them to respect them and can later arrest them because they didn't obey a law that should have been written with human compassion in the first place. The takeaway isn't to bash the police. The takeaway is that the community wants alternatives. The community needs services over policing. Those same children expressed food and housing being more important for their safety. The same kids who have to idly wait at a community center because their parents are working. What else could we be doing for them that we're not? In a survey we conducted, we asked people of color, what does a safe space look like to you? 25% said fewer or no police. 88% expressed negative feelings towards the police. That includes too much of a presence, them being too violent, rarely providing solutions and targeting people. They bring more harm than good in their eyes. We need help, not punishment. So what can we do? That looks like looking at the police budget and moving that funding to things immediately help. For every 6 officers that would be hired, you could hire 2 mental health professionals or middle school youth specialists instead with that same budget. This means more healthcare workers over police. Community responders over community policing, and that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next card I have here is for Phoenix Nelson. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hi, my name is Phoenix. I live in Tempe, and I'm just a few days out from graduating from Arizona State University. I wanted to address 2 items that are very important to the community and myself personally as the need for sustainable solutions continue to grow. There is a need for the Climate Justice and Indigenous Land Stewardship Program specialist, specifically needing a personnel, and this personnel needs to be an Indigenous person. Diversity and inclusion can only go so far if you are only asking and hearing from white people instead of listening and actively engaging with people of color. In the Tempe's People Budget Environmental Town Hall, there was an overwhelming response and call for listening to Indigenous people and having them lead conversations around land. The cost for this could be covered from the salary of 1 police officer. I also wanted to address the need for cooling center communications outreach. In the People's Budget survey, respondents were asked what should be done about extreme heat, and 45% said we should invest in cooling centers. Many people from the survey, specifically for unsheltered communities, or also known as homeless people, they asked for misters at bus stops and other public areas. The heat in this desert is deadly, and not everyone has a house where they can crank up the AC after being in the sun all day. Cooling centers are needed as a result of hotter summers from climate change, and it becomes a public safety and a public health issue as the heat is killing people. The cost for this cooling center would be about 1/4 of a police officer. It is so important as members of the council to put money in places that you believe are genuinely priorities to making the community better, which includes making sure people have a roof over their head, access to food and water, and heat relief, and aren't dying from rising temperatures, and uplifting people from every background to make sure they feel safe and have a space after years and years of constant neglect. I ask that you take the time to listen rather than just hear the plea that we make as members of Tempe who are outside the box of typical Tempe residents who are engaged in the budget. I am one of many who is a woman, a person of color, a student of a growing generation, someone living almost paycheck to paycheck, someone who works 2 jobs, someone who really cares about other people, and someone who really cares about investing in sustainable solutions, which means a sustainable or long-lasting community environmentally, financially, and socially. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next card I have is from Sarah Tacola. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hello, my name is Dr. Tacola. As of next week, I will be a graduate from ASU School of Sustainability. I lived in Tempe for 4 years until I was gentrified out in 2020. And I've been leading the research team on the community-based participatory research project, the People's Budget. And while I'm glad you included our report in the budget, marginalized communities need more than token acknowledgement. We need to be listened to. How you allocate funding shows what you think matters. And right now, based on the budget allocation, the protection of property through policing seems to be more important, while people of color, those with disabilities and mental health challenges, unsheltered communities, and low-income communities matter the least. In our report, we told you how 83% of those surveyed in the People's Budget said they would use a free and accessible community garden. 65% of people said the cost was the biggest barrier to getting healthy food for their family. And 43% said we need more trees to offer shade and food. This was especially evident in our Spanish survey report, where they spoke about the difficulties of getting food, not only due to cost, but distance. Since the food city has been removed, this has been a huge gap and created a food desert in East Tempe for the Latino community. The Sustainability Office has offered a solution. With the backyard garden and food forest programs. Both of these programs only cost $100,000, which is about 1.5 officers. And yet this is on the chopping block to be removed. Glyphosate is a known cancer-causing agent. There's a currently $11 billion lawsuit against Roundup due to people who've gotten sick or died from it. The fact that Tempe is still using this dangerous chemical is alarming and not in accordance with your own values of public safety and sustainability. Gas blowers over time cause hearing loss. Cutting electric blowers and glyphosate elimination programs means continuing to put maintenance workers at risk of cancer, hearing loss, and toxic pollution exposure. This is an environmental injustice to working class people who are by and large immigrants and from low-income communities, creating unnecessary and long-term harm to their health. These are real public safety issues, and for the cost of just 6.5 police officers, you could eliminate the cancer and hearing loss risk for your own workers here in Tempe. Tempe, here is your chance to live up to your goals that you aspire to in equity in action. Will you defer to marginalized communities? Will you move towards community ownership of policy? Will you prioritize people over property? Will you center the most marginalized? Do the right thing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next up, I'm sorry, we can't have any clapping, please. Next up, we have Kim Stravers. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hello, council members. My name is Kim Stravers. I'm a resident of Phoenix, but I spend a good portion of my free time and disposable income supporting Tempe's businesses, community, and recreation opportunities. The way you decide to allocate public money says everything about how you view the public, about who and what you think is important, who or what you think deserves more or less of our collective public dollars. As the folks before me have said so well, policing protects property, human services protects people. As much as we like to think that numbers and data are separate from emotions and values, when it comes to municipal spending, they are deeply intertwined. And that's not a problem, but an opportunity. With the 22-23 budget cycle, we have the power to recalibrate spending to align with the priorities the Tempe community has shared with you through the city's own surveys and outreach, as well as through the work you have asked Black Lives Matter Phoenix Metro, CMES, and their partners to perform through their participation in Tempe's Equity in Action initiative. Recognizing that city-led engagement efforts disproportionately reach white, middle-class, English-speaking homeowners who don't use public programs and services, you asked community organizations to engage a more diverse range of Tempe residents. They have surveyed more than 400 people, had several community conversations, and documented results in a report that you received for April 21st work session, many points of which have been outlined in the last 15 minutes. They've done their part. It's now in your hands to decide whether it was worth the time and energy of disenfranchised people in Tempe to even tell you what they want and need. In an increasingly partisan environment, locally and nationally, it's more important than ever that we unify around and fund projects and programs that keep our entire community in all of its diversity most secure and most supported over the long term, rather than continue to throw increasing amounts of money at structures like policing that have been proven to cause more problems than they are intended to solve. If you don't have the courage to step outside business as usual, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those who are unsheltered, disabled, and/or financially insecure, will lose any confidence they may have had in their ability to trust their elected officials and those appointed to or hired into government. They deserve to not only be counted, but valued, not just listened to, but heard and given respect through action. The Tempe People's Budget has done the work requested by the city to bring to you the ideas held as most important by the folks you too often fail to engage. I wholeheartedly support their efforts, and I'm asking you to follow through on your ask and their labor and implement these priorities as you strive to uphold your civic pledge to serve this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rosa Renteria. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hola.
¿Necesita ayuda?
Sí,
Traductor?
solo
Ok.
sí, ¿puedes hacerlo?
Sí,
Ok. Ay, muchas gracias.
nada más que hable
Sí, sí,
despacito
sí,
y...
sí. Sí.
I'm gonna help translate.
Hola, mi nombre es Rosa Rentería. Soy residente de Tempe y soy organizadora en Semillas, Arizona.
Okay. Her name is Rosa Renteria, and she's a resident of Tempe.
Yo vengo aquí porque quiero que usen el dinero en más programas
She is here because she would like for the money to be used in more programs, or the budget,
para jóvenes especialmente de color
for young people, especially of minorities,
que están pasando por problemas mentales
that are experiencing mental health,
y jóvenes en depresión.
and young people with depression.
Así los policías no tendrían tanto contacto
That
con
way, the
ellos,
police officer will not have a lot of contact with them,
con nuestros jóvenes, y ellos no estarían en peligro a manos de la policía.
with our young ones, and they will not be arrested by the police.
Porque yo
officers.
tengo un hijo en depresión,
Because she has a son that is going through depression,
pero no me gustaría hablarle a la policía para que tenga contacto con él
and she would not like to be calling the police to have contact with him.
en un momento que entre en crisis porque he visto que los matan, entonces prefiero tenerlo en mi casa.
So she would not like to contact the police officers when her son is going through a crisis, because she has seen that they get killed by the police officers.
Por eso quiero que haya más programas para ellos y para nosotros los padres para saber cómo ayudarlos.
That's why she would like to have more programs to be implemented for the young population and for the parents, so they can know how to deal with young ones with this kind of disability or depression.
Es todo. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Sandra Ojeda. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Nada más si puede hablar así, despacito como ella.
Sí, claro que
Ok.
sí. Hola, soy Sandra Ojeda, organizadora en Semillas, Arizona.
Hi, her name is Sandra Ojeda.
Organizadora en Semillas, Arizona.
No sé qué.
Organizadora,
She organizes
Semillas, Arizona.
Semillas Arizona.
Yo estoy aquí porque estamos sufriendo de falta de alimentos.
She is here because they are suffering from lack of food.
Mi comunidad en este momento no tiene a dónde ir.
Her community at this time does
Nos,
not
cer-
have
nos
anywhere
cerraron,
to go.
nos cerraron el Food City,
They closed Food City,
el único lugar donde hablaban español,
the only place where they would speak Spanish,
donde no nos sentíamos con caras de racismo.
where they felt that they were not being faced with racism.
Y ahora mismo está puesto a la venta una plaza,
And right now, there's a plaza that is on sale,
que es lo único que nos queda a la comunidad,
that's the only thing that the community has left,
que se llama Don Filos.
that is called Untitled.
Es una tienda donde nos han abierto no solo la oportunidad del alimento,
This is a store that not only opened up to help them with the food supplies,
también nos escuchan, ¿verdad? Las personas dueñas de esa tienda,
they always listened. The owners of that store are always listening.
entonces yo estoy aquí para que ese dinero, en vez de ponerlo en los policías, que es lo que pasa todo el tiempo,
She is here because the money that always goes to the police department,
lo pongan en esas necesidades, ¿verdad?
that you apply it to those necessities.
También nuestros jóvenes necesitan más talleres.
Also, the young population needs more.
En este momento hay muchos jóvenes en depresión, con muchos traumas,
Right now, there's a lot of young people with a lot of depression and traumas,
y el sistema solo los empuja a que tengan contacto con la policía.
and the system only pushes them to have those encounters with the police officers.
Entonces yo los invito a que se pongan a pensar de que también
Oh, she's asking that you guys think about.
No todas las personas tienen un auto para poder ir a una tienda lejos de su hogar.
Not everybody has a car so they can go long distances for shopping.
Es todo.
And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next card I have is from Luna Tesorero. Please come forward, state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Good afternoon. My name is Luna and I'm a student at McClintock High School. And today I want to discuss the issues we have at our Tempe schools. I think that instead of putting money into the police officers and school security who love to criminalize and kill Black and brown children, you should be putting money into our education. And I would like to talk about the fact that my school has over 5 security guards, but not enough money for clubs, sports, books, computers, and soap in the bathroom. I think that the system needs to do better for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next card I have is from Joelle Valenzuela. Please come forward and state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
My name is Joel Valenzuela, and I'm a resident here in Tempe, and I just live right down the street from here. And so I've been in this community for a long time. I'm also a public school teacher with Tempe School District, and I would agree with her. So what I'm going to say is my main point of everything is healthy communities have the most resources for the community. Let's see. Okay, so just like, for instance, when I was coming down the street one day and there's too many gaps and everything, and that's why those resources need to be in place. Because I was coming down the street, there was a young man overdosing. 2 other people were trying to help him. They took off running because they didn't want to get in trouble. Of course, I parked, got off of my car, started checking him. The fire department's down the street, but they couldn't move fast enough. One of the vans pulls up that's supposed to give resources when people overdose at their homes. They pull up and I'm like, okay, can you do CPR? You know, because I got to go back to work. No, we don't do that. Okay, we don't do that. What do? You have a van, there's 2 or 3 people in there. I got to go back to work and teach kids. We just give out cards. Okay, never mind. So take away that, I start helping him. Fire department pulls up, I jump in my car, go back to work. That's one instance. Another instance, there's a young man, the police don't know what to do with him because he was hallucinating, everything like that. And I pull up and they're like, oh, we don't know what to do with him, take him to the hospital, do this. They don't even know, they don't have phone numbers to call people. There's so many resources that they could call people to come pick them up and help them. Oh, we don't do that. We don't go out of Tempe. Okay, so just leave someone that is hallucinating, walking all over the place, all these kinds of stuff. And so the healthiest communities, best communities have the best resources. And we need that for our community here. I mean, there's such a big gap in that. If I wanna go to the little store down the street like that, I gotta pay $4 or $5 for a little thing of spaghetti sauce, you know. My rent has gone up enormous. Just driving down here, I looked and I'm like, oh my gosh, they just tore down more apartments. What's going up there now? You know, and pretty soon I'm gonna get squeezed out of there too. So that's why I'm saying that we need resources for our community. Just yesterday, I was volunteering in one of the other schools, and I'm walking through there, and one of the other teachers looks at me and she says, oh, you're cute. What's your theme? What are you dressed up as? I mean, come on, you know, I'm Native, I'm indigenous to these lands. Our people have been here for 30 to 40,000 years before 1492. We're here, we're not going anywhere. And I'm spending my extra time helping and volunteering and doing all these things I can. And even in the square that I'm in, doing what I can. And there's so many gaps and you guys are missing it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next speaker we have, going to the virtual ones, we have Vanessa DiCarlo. Please state your name and place of residence. You have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Hi, my name is Vanessa DiCarlo. I am an inclusion specialist and educational consultant supporting equitable and accessible inclusive environments for disabled and neurodivergent communities, and consult with families and schools in Tempe, Maricopa, and East Valley. Within my role, I've been recognized as an expert within the Maricopa County courts to evaluate the efficacy of support services and programming for disabled and neurodivergent individuals. In addition to my professional role, I am a parent of a middle school student whose school has partnerships with Tempe schools. Our middle schooler has recently needed mental health services that has transformed the trajectory of their life. Unfortunately, because schools and communities commit significant funding to punishment and policing, our family needed to acquire mental health services outside the school, which many families cannot access. It is critically important to fully fund equitable mental health programming, especially for students who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous and disabled. This must be a priority if community health is your goal. The CDC stated youth with poor mental health may struggle with school and grades, decision-making, and their health because many of these healthy behaviors and habits are established in adolescence that will carry over into the adult years. And it is important to respond and fully fund the youth mental health crisis as identified by the U.S. Surgeon General. We are happy to hear that you agreed with us on April 21st that we needed to fund mental health crisis response, mental health support, and programming for youth and energy equity. However, the council made no suggestions for where to find the money for these programs, which means that you're ignoring our call for reduced size and scope of the police department and investing in our youth and community. Community policing functions as a community surveillance that maintains the size and expands the scope of police. Please no to unfreezing the 19 police officer positions and no to the overhire program. We need, the youth need you to use that money to fully fund all of the mental health programs you've agreed to, as well as the climate justice and Indigenous land steward program specialists and other sustainability staff positions. The recommended programs are great, but they need personnel to be successful. The backyard garden and food forest programs, particularly when more and more lower income areas in Tempe, such as La Victoria, are becoming food deserts. Conversion to electric blowers and elimination of toxic chemicals used by parks, maintenance workers who are currently at higher risk of cancer and hearing loss. Food, shelter, and water for all is public safety. Mental and physical health for all is public safety. Climate justice is public safety. Community policing is not, and our youth and our community must be invested in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next card I have here is from Patricia Pagliuca. Please state your name and place of residence, and you have 3 minutes to address the City Council.
Mr. Mayor, we do not see Patricia in the audience.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. With that, that is the final card that I have, unless, Madam Clerk, you have any more? All good? Okay, thank you so much. All right. Which gets me to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 3, issue review session. Item 3A is Tempe Community Council Agency Review Community Recommendations, Fiscal Year 2022-23, Human Services Funding.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Octavia Harris, Executive Director of Tempe Community Council. Presenting tonight with me are Nancy Blevins and Linda Martin. They are co-chairs of the Tempe Community Council Community Impact Committee. That is the governing body of the agency review funding process. Nancy is in the 3rd year on the TCC board, and she is the chair of the finance committee as well. Linda is in her 1st year on the Tempe Community Council board and has been serving on the Community Impact Committee and volunteering for agency review for 4 years.
Thank you, and thanks for having us. I'd also like to acknowledge sitting with me. Back in the audience, we have a whole host of volunteers who volunteered through the agency review process, as well as many members of our board of directors. So thanks for having us all. Tempe Community Council has been privileged for the past 50 years to administer and manage the distribution of human services funds on behalf of the City of Tempe through the process known as agency review. This process is truly community-driven effort and much more than simply a grant process. TCC mobilizes interested community members who work and or live in Tempe to bring the voice of the community. TCC works with citizen volunteers who dedicate their valuable time over a 3-month period reading, evaluating human services proposals, interviewing respective agencies, and making funding recommendations to this body. This process can be complex and time-consuming. It's also eye-opening, unique, and rewarding for everyone involved. Citizen involvement in the Human Services Agency funding process not only removes the politics from the process, but it brings the community together to become better informed about the struggles and strengths nonprofit agencies face to fund, create, and implement quality programs. TCC's mission of connecting those in need to those who care includes nonprofit organizations, both inside and outside of the Tempe boundaries, that persistently address the myriad of needs in our community and provide high-quality, vital services. As we return to a pre-pandemic workplace, we see these partner agencies transforming social service delivery to meet the current need. Many have launched new services or expanded existing services or changed how they operate and serve their communities, including how they communicate, how they prioritize, how they fundraise, and how they leverage technology. Many have increased their work around the deep social inequities that have been illuminated through these times, and they are using this moment to advocate for systemic change. And the work of the agency review directly supports Tempe City Council's strategic priority 3.10. So we had great participation this year. We had a total of 54 programs that applied from 45 separate agencies, and our initial funding recommendations are going to be for 52 programs and 43 agencies. We also had fantastic community participation. We have 55 volunteers, including community members, TCC Board of Directors, and the Tempe Community Council Community Impact Committee, and the City of Tempe staff. It was 1,100 volunteers, and we think that's actually a little bit of a conservative number. So in 2021, the Tempe Community Council Board of Directors hired Corona Insights, a Denver-based research and consulting firm, to conduct a comprehensive human services needs assessment. The effort was commissioned to evaluate human services need in Tempe at a time when the COVID pandemic was still at its height. Respondents and community experts were asked to rank service priorities. Corona Insights was able to improve equity by targeting survey results from low and moderate income households to measure the amount and variations of human services needs across the community. By focusing on citizens in this demographic, they were able to solicit survey responses from people who may be most vulnerable and in need of human services but are not yet accessing them. Tempe Community Council will convene service providers, the faith community, city employees, and people who receive services or need human services in further exploration of the findings of this report. We will begin with the areas that are identified as priorities, and we will design our strategies, activities, goals, and outcome measures to implement and measure meaningful changes and effective community impact. What you see on the screen here are the rank order of priorities for funding this year. Number 1 was homeless individuals and family, children and youth, working poor, individuals with disabilities, older adults, and then domestic violence and sexual assault survivors. And I'm going to turn it to Linda.
Very good. The scoring criteria includes the application score,
the interview grade, and the prioritization score assigned by the results of the preliminary findings from the Community Needs Assessment Survey. The application score and the financial scores are added together and represent 50% of the total score. The interview is scored and is 40% of the score, and the survey prioritization that was just discussed is included to make for the final score for each program. In terms of our budget, the funding available to TCC's agency review each year has come from three primary sources as shown above. We really appreciate the commitment that the City of Tempe has demonstrated to this effort. This year, the amounts available are, as you can see, from the general fund, we have $1.1 million. From the Together Tempe water bill donations, we have $40,000. From Together Tempe direct donations, we have $1,380 there, for a total of $1,141,380. For the agency requests that we received, the total requests were over $2 million, $2,243,990, leaving a difference of about $1.1 million, as you can see.
So our funding reduction formula for this year, the funding is the same. The way we reduced that amount was the same that we used last year. The volunteers who gather at the final consensus meeting followed these guiding principles: fairness and equity, rewarding outstanding performance, and not including poor performance. Like last year, if the agency scored less than 75, they would not receive funding. Those who scored 75 and greater are then reduced to receive the percentage that matches the score they received in the process that Linda just described. So if you scored an 85 in the process, your reduction would be to 85% of your recommended amount. To reward our outstanding performers, if the score was 95 or greater, that program funding was not further reduced. For programs receiving between 75 and 94, the final reduction was a smoothing calculation that came out to be 67% of the recommended numbers. Again, this process was identical to last year's, focusing on fairness and performance. The funding breakdown by category is, as you see on your screen, crisis, stability, and self-sufficiency. This shows you that we had a fairly even distribution this year of where the monies were going.
Although this is a human process, we are bound by the dollars that we have available. We are all aware that the need for quality services is always greater than the funds available. Still, we are extremely grateful that the City of Tempe provides generously to support human services work. Of special note is the additional over $500,000 in one-time fiscal year 22 funding that is not included in the chart to the right, but were funds that were added specifically for the expansion of congregate shelter options during COVID. Looking to the chart on the right, you will see more detail about the types and the amounts of funding that agency review has received, along with the differences seen over the past 4 years. You'll see the City of Tempe general fund dollars, which this year was $1.1 million. Community development block grants, which are available to nonprofits to apply for and are administered through our Human Services Department. And the Together Tempe water bill and the Together Tempe direct contributions to TCC, which have declined over the past few years. We'll talk more about how to address these declines in the next steps section of this presentation. These charts represent the difference between the amount that agencies requested and the amounts of funds available, broken out by population and by category groupings. The yellow bars represent the total funding requested, while the blue and orange represent the funding that will be received for each category. It's a clear and marked difference. There's ample evidence that the City of Tempe has made human service funding a priority. For example, those one-time funds for shelter expansion mentioned earlier and other mid-year supplementals administered through the Human Services Department that nonprofit agencies successfully won contracts for. But even with this generosity, there is still a gap, which means less people are served. Funding nonprofit programs at full capacity is rarely possible. So when we are funding at, in this year's case, 67% or less of what the agencies are requesting, we encourage them to find other supplemental funding sources. We provide the agencies with referrals to other funding sources and encourage them to apply to obtain additional funding to decrease their shortfall. We'll speak more about solutions in the next step slide. However, the service capacity differential that is created from this funding deficit can mean that vital services can't happen in all population areas, like older adults who will be left without home and community-based services that are necessary to maintain quality of life and independence in their homes. Survivors of domestic violence and their families may be left without home and community-based services that are necessary to maintain quality of life and independence in their homes. Or families who have experienced suicide by a loved one who will be left to cope with this challenge on their own, leaving them vulnerable to the effects of survivor grief without specialized individual and group support. On a happier note, we identified several process improvements last year that I'm pleased to report our dedicated Community Impact Committee acted on this year. We analyzed our need. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, TCC, with oversight from the Community Impact Committee of the board, completed the comprehensive community needs assessment. This assessment will help to inform prioritization of agency review funding in the coming years. We implemented changes to our processes and procedures of agency review based on volunteer feedback we received last year that resulted in a more efficient and enjoyable process based on recent volunteer feedback. And while we remain virtual this year, we plan to offer a hybrid option next year, again, based on the feedback we have received. You can look to your booklet included in the materials for this presentation for many details about this year's recommendations. We refined the application questions for improved scoring and to uncover how agencies are approaching services through a lens of equity. The committee also worked to provide a rubric to score agency applications, financial reviews, interviews, and monitoring for increased objectivity. We regularly monitor programs quarterly through reporting and valuable site visits, on-site or virtually as needed. And we have continued our commitment to improve contract performance outcomes and indicators. Specifically, we provided additional training, technical assistance, and worked with agencies to refine their performance measurement or tools. In terms of continuous improvement and next steps, we are dedicated to continuous improvement of the process and procedures guiding this community-driven effort. Already, we have identified we want to continue to improve and refine our contract performance outcomes and indicators. We will continue to provide additional technical assistance and work with agencies to refine their performance measurement or tools. We will prioritize our efforts to achieve collective impact. We will analyze the human services needs with all available tools possible, including the comprehensive human services needs assessment. We will set clear strategies and priorities for the nonprofit community to respond to through our funding process. We will continue to refine and improve the volunteer training and recruitment process to include educational opportunities like the Lunch and Learns we held this year, to better inform our volunteers of poverty, social justice issues, and how nonprofits thrive and survive during a pandemic. Also important is continuing to refine our volunteer recruitment process to ensure we have a volunteer base that better represents the diversity of our citizens. Also, Tempe Community Council will explore new funding sources to increase our contribution to agency review funding amount. We are very grateful to the City of Tempe for their commitment of over $1 million, and we want to help offset some of the gap between the requested dollar amount and the amount of funding available. Year upon year, this difference has grown wider while inflation is growing. Yet our funding has remained level. we want to address this important reality. We are committed to finding creative new ways to decrease the gap in funding, including requesting an increase in funding from the city through the budgeting process.
So on a final note, I just want to restate that our volunteers are exceptional individuals. They've brought their lived experience, professional expertise, and their compassionate hearts to this process once again, and we want to thank them, not just the ones who are in the room with us today, but all of them. And to all of you all, thank you for your continued support, and we are happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the presentation. Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Yeah, I really appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate the work that not only you three have done, but your 55 volunteers as well. I know it's a difficult job, right? I mean, you had basically about 50% of what was requested you're able to give out. So you're kind of picking like who's going to get what and when. And anytime you're doing that, it certainly is stressful. And I know you can feel your emotion when you speak. It's sad to leave money or say no when there's such obviously a need for these services. So I really appreciate not only what you're doing, but the analytical and data-driven way that you do it, that you have equations and metrics and things that help you establish who's going to get what, how much, what percentage of their ask, and things like that. It's the agency review process is one of the best things going on in this city as far as I'm concerned. You all do a very, very difficult job, and you take the politics right out of it. So it's not us up here horse trading on which charities we want to see get what. And it's true, though. It's true. I mean, we all have our certain, we all advocate for different things, and we all have our certain charities that we donate to and we support. But you take that away from us, and you make it such a clean and transparent and well-vetted out process. And it does us a tremendous service to the city every single year, because I know how difficult it must be to do it. And to your 55 volunteers, they're doing this just as a labor of love for the city. So this every year is tremendous, and it's a huge effort. And I want to thank you and your volunteers for taking the job off our plate. Not only that, but doing such a well thought out and thorough application of what you've been asked to do. So again, you guys are rock stars, and I certainly very much appreciate what you've done. As far as coming up with more funding opportunities for TCC, through your own grassroots measures, I actually do have some ideas around that I won't bore you with now, but I will have me and Robin's committee maybe reach out to you to talk about maybe what we can do as a city to aid you in your efforts, because $2,000 annually isn't a lot of money, and I certainly think given what TCC does in our community, we could probably get some more for you as long as we get the word out there and give people different opportunities to finance you. So thanks again. We will be reaching out certainly to talk more about that. But again, I really appreciate what you all have done, and I couldn't be happier with the agency review process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Councilmember Garland.
I agree with Randy. I think you guys do an amazing job, and your volunteers, all of them, 1,100 that you guys mentioned, everybody that takes part in this. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to you also. I was looking at your slide number, page 6, and it was talking about the budget and the funding and the Together Tempe. And I was looking at that thinking, the money that we have written down there is $40,000. And I was checking today and found out that we get about 43,000 bills, water bills that are sent out monthly. So I looked at that and I thought, gosh, how many people out there, there's some great people out there that have been volunteering or giving money to this project and this program with their extra dollar that they say that they'll go ahead and pay. But if we did 43,000, if every single one of us did that $1 a month, we would get $516,000 compared to the $40,000 we have right now. So I would love to find a way to shout from a rooftop how important that $1 is and what a difference it could make in your program. So if you take that $516,000 and you divide that, it pretty much cuts the difference that you have in half. So as Robin and Randy can bring up in their group, I would just love to get on all my social medias and start really asking people to donate. And one of the things is we had a discussion, or we had part of a consent agenda. I'm just going to mention the business, but the firehouse subs. When you go into Firehouse Subs, you can make an additional donation and it goes to your community. And yeah, okay, does it really go to the community? Well, one of our council meetings just a few months ago, we approved, I thought it was $14,000 that they were giving to the city to pass on to our fire department for equipment that the fire department needed. It really does matter. And so I think having that money there, or that extra dollar that you can add on to your water bill, I think we really need to find some way, and I'm sure it's been done before, but some way to let people know, here are the people that that money is serving. That $1, that $12 that you could give for the year will make a huge difference in lives. And I want to do everything I can to shout that from a rooftop. And so I will do what I can to help with that also. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Vice Mayor Keating?
Yeah, to that point, Councilmember Garland, you actually touched on some of the things that I wanted to work on and discuss. So I think we're of the same mind as far as that regard. Yeah, we didn't talk about this before the meeting either. we didn't plan this anyway. Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Councilmember DeVar, then Councilmember Cubie.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, guys. I mean, this is a great presentation, and obviously it shows the work you guys and dedication and the volunteers. I was once a volunteer way back when, so I appreciate the time and effort everyone puts into this, because it is tasking, trying to allocate that money out, and you guys do a great job. And I think Councilmember Keating said it all. Just how tough it is and how you guys need more resources, and we understand that, and we try to do our due diligence on making that happen on the city side, but at the same time we do need to make sure that the residents and people can also contribute to that. We do have some big funders that often come our way, and we need to also garnish the relationship with the people that we have here, with State Farm, with Carvana, with whoever's out there. I mean, those are opportunities and true opportunities that we need to start tapping in those resources. And I believe what you guys have said, how do we get that information out to help dedicate more money to these services? Yeah, advertising usually hits it, but we got to hit advertising harder. We don't see enough of what the city's real goals are, and maybe there's 1, 2, or 3 that we have to constantly showcase over and over and over. And I would have to say this qualifies as probably one of those 3, to be honest with you. So I think there's multiple ways to improve those resources. We just need to start tapping into it. We have some big players here in the city. We developed the city to attract those big players. Now is the time to help get those fundings from those players, and I think we have an opportunity to do that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DeVar. Councilmember Cubie.
Thank you. Thank you for all your volunteerism, and it was such a mind-blowing experience to be a volunteer in agency review. So I sympathize with what you're going through, and I know how painful it is not to be able to fund more and a higher percentage. I have a few questions. One is, and Kim, I've talked to you about this before, but I don't know if the rules have changed, but is it possible for TCC, for Tempe Community Council, to become a state tax credit accepting organization? Is that possible? Does anyone know at the Octavia?
That does require a process, and
Right.
we're currently working with our accountants to work through what that process would look like,
Mhm.
because we have to have a certain number of people that we're directly serving, so not through other agencies that are moderate income. So
Sure.
we have to work on those counts. But
Because I know
thank you.
the rules that, yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't direct that question to you. I had a conversation with Kim about it, so it was kind of on my mind. Because I know, the rules have changed such that you can donate April 15th, 2022, and it could have applied for last year's taxes. And it can be kind of a more, let's say, a painless way to give, and should really be explored. I'd love to see that explored. And secondly, if it can't, or in addition to help promote a campaign of, we talk about supporting local business, how about giving locally? And we have done that in the past. Councilmember Aradana Savage and I participated in that promotion a few years back. I think it was before COVID. But I bet almost every one of the organizations that we fund can accept state tax credits. And in the case, that's $400 for an individual, $800 for a couple. In the case of charities that help foster care kids, that's $500 a person. So it's really a boon and can be really helpful. Yet I find a lot of people don't even know about it. I talk to people at work and they have no idea that it's even possible. In Tempe leadership class, 25, best class ever, we had the shower power program, and we were able to raise all that we needed for the shower mobile trailer in a few weeks right before Christmas using the state tax credit funds. So if you were looking at that, I just think it has untapped potential. But I do want to talk about the opportunity that we might be able to have to put more money into the fund this year. We have done it in previous years. We gave, I think, $250,000 more than this rough amount. Was it like 3 or 4 years of running? And if Ken Jones were here, he'd pop up and say exactly how many years. But Tom, maybe you know. But there were a number of years where we added to the fund, that we were able to add to the fund. Is that a possibility this year? Because I know we do have a certain amount that's set aside for contingency, and a larger amount than traditionally that we've had for contingency. And this isn't a political thing. It's not just saying we're going to just, it would be funding more fully the organizations that all the volunteers have said that should be funded, but have not received nearly a full allocation. So is that possible to look at? And we're not done with the budget process, right? We're still in negotiations. Things aren't finalized. Is it possible to look at that and look at boosting it this year?
See, I'll ask who from staff would like to take that one. I am not the money guy.
I think it's yours, Tom. And I also, obviously I'd have to ask my council colleagues if this is an issue they'd like to consider.
Mayor and council, good evening. I apologize, Councilmember, I can't answer the. Oh.
Madam City Attorney, I saw your hand fly up. I don't know what happened, but I got to go to you whenever I see that happen. So,
excuse me, Mayor. I apologize for the interruption. May I respectfully request that we have Tom talk about this particular issue when the budget item is on the agenda, which is about to happen very soon.
Good.
Okay, sounds good. All right, any other council members need any additional comments or questions? Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Ladies, thank you guys very much. I certainly do appreciate your work. And everybody in the audience, I mean, if you're a volunteer and you are on agency, can you raise your hand? Very cool. I just want to say thank you so much for what you guys do, and just acknowledge and appreciate the time and the energy and the efforts that you did. You guys said it, and I know that Genevieve said it earlier too. It is not an easy job to be able to do that, and there's always a need, right? And the fact that not one agency can do all the work, I 100% agree with that. And I think that you guys have a really good conglomerate, a good collaboration, so we can really address some of those gaps that we're seeing. So I couldn't be more pleased with the work that you've done. I mean, it's been a really long time since I've done agency review, but it is very eye-opening. I would highly suggest if somebody hasn't done it, just do it, because it's a really good way to really understand what the needs are out there. And I think the work that goes into trying to address those needs, to me, and what you guys are doing to always try to better your process. I want to say thank you for doing that, because not everybody always does that. And so you're holding yourself accountable for the process that you have and always trying to improve it. And I'm super grateful for that, and getting the feedback from the citizens to really understand what some of the concerns are out there. So I am super grateful. I just want to say thank you to all the volunteers that are out there. Thank you for what you do. You are continually making a difference, and hopefully you enjoyed it enough and it was rewarding enough that you'll do it again. So anyway, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. The council's already said everything I would have said, so I won't bore you with what I'm going to say, but great job as always. Really appreciate all your work and all your efforts and all the volunteers, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have item 3B, which is the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission Youth Town Hall Annual Update. And I see we've got, let's see. I see Adrian coming up.
Jason, there you go. I'm gonna have you control it. You want me to control it? Yeah. Cool. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Adrian Cassio. I am the advisor for the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission. It's a great honor to introduce our MIAC chairs here. And we have Sophia Pereno, Sean Washington, and Rucha Sate, who will be presenting on our annual updates. I'm going to allow them to give a little bit more of an introduction on themselves, and I'm going to hand it over, starting with Sean.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Sean Washington. I am the MIAC chairperson. This is my third and final year on MIAC, and I am a sophomore at Tempe High.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Sophia Perano. I'm the Vice Chair of MIAC. This is also my third and final year on the commission, and I attend McClintock High School, where I am a junior.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Rucha Sate. I am a sophomore at Corona del Sol, and this is my first year in MIAC. I am the Project Management Chair.
That's a nice sound. All right, and that's kind of what we look like. All right, so just a little bit of backstory about MIAC. We were established in 1980 just to address a couple of our diverse youth challenges, and we are a commission of up to 30 between freshmen and seniors, so 9th to 12th graders, and we really just give a voice to the youth to advocate for changes we want to see.
So to tell you guys a little bit about what we have been up to this year, in 2021 and 2022, we had a couple of major goals. One of our first major goals was increasing participation. That meant we got out into the community a lot more. My commissioners attended the League of Cities and Towns, which was really exciting. We also participated in the vaccination campaign, the community budget survey, and the ASU Human Rights Festival panel. We also had a very big accomplishment this year. We increased our membership to 30 members, which is an all-time high for us. We also had our first successful fundraising project through Chipotle and held our first virtual format youth town hall.
So on this side, we just wanted to express some of our appreciation for the following departments and offices and partners who have worked with us in engaging with MIAC. They all show on the screen right there, also nice. So we wanted to recognize that the City of Tempe is addressing and has made progress towards the priorities that we have put forth and set this year. And we just hoped that today we can provide basically the fruits of your guys' labor and what we have seen and what we feel we have done great on. What can we move forward with? And we just wanted to foster our dialogue and collaboration efforts with us MIAC commissioners.
As previously mentioned, this year we held our 41st annual Youth Town Hall. This year's event was held virtually on Tuesday, February 24th of this year. We would like to thank the Escalante Community Center for providing a space for MIA's commissioners to convene in person to host Youth Town Hall. This year's Youth Town Hall topics were diversity, equity, and inclusion, emotional and mental wellness, and environmental sustainability. My commissioners chose to focus on these topics because we thought they reflected youth priorities and the priorities of our commissioners. Through a virtual format at Youth Town Hall, MIAC utilized breakout rooms to conduct groups on each topic and collected student feedback. We know that some students may feel more comfortable with sharing feedback anonymously or in written format, for which we provided a Google form for all students to use. The Google survey also contained questions regarding each topic area, which we were able to use to provide data, which is presented in the action plan and within this presentation. Thirdly, we worked with City of Tempe staff to have them share their expertise and provide guidance to MIAC facilitators. Lastly, we had a panel of decision makers that could speak on a policy level about topics and answer questions from students. We'd also like to thank Vice Mayor Keating for participating in the panel.
So as we go into an analysis of each of our subcommittees, we're going to start with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's the subcommittee that I was a part of. Our primary focus this year was addressing microaggressions at school, in the workplace, and in the community. So our groups discussed what microaggressions are and how to recognize them. And many participants also had the opportunity to share their personal experiences with microaggressions. We gave them that platform in the hopes that they would be able to kind of talk about and have that opportunity to discuss their experiences. The subcommittee explored microaggressions in various contexts and also went into interactions with police officers as well. So to provide you a little bit of an explanation of our student feedback that we've received, we found that 83% of our survey respondents said that they have experienced microaggressions in school or their workplace. They said that this was primarily because of race, gender, or sexual orientation, and over 20% said that they had experienced microaggressions many times. We see that this is something very, very impactful to those in our community. So as a result, We have a couple of recommendations and strategies that we are going to present to you. So we'd like to see an increase in training for city staff to help them identify and avoid different types of microaggressions. We'd also like to include questions in satisfaction surveys that address microaggressions. And finally, we'd like to include preferred pronouns and applications for programs. We believe that this is going to be very impactful in creating a more healthy environment and reducing the microaggressions that we see in the city of Tempe.
Another one of our subcommittees was emotional and mental wellness. The focus and goal of the subcommittee is to increase awareness and availability of mental health resources for youth, and to identify what barriers are currently preventing students from accessing these services. And lastly, what can be done to improve these services. At Youth Town Hall, we gathered lots of student feedback, and one piece of data we'd like to highlight is that when students were asked if they felt comfortable talking to school staff when stressed, only 50% of students agreed or strongly agreed. MIAC's council recommendation is to improve the quantity and quality of emotional and mental health resources on school campuses. Some strategies MIAC has identified are to increase the number of counselors and youth specialists at each school, to allow students to provide anonymous feedback and increase training for staff as needed to help improve service quality, and to invite youth to serve on interview panels for youth specialists and counselors. MIAC would also just like to appreciate the increase in youth specialists from our 2020 recommendation.
And our last subcommittee was environmental sustainability, and the main focus of this was really just to highlight and look at the way that the city are currently addressing the environmental sustainability, our resilient energy hubs, and our solar charging EV stations for our public transport. So when we asked some of our participants at Youth Town Hall what they noted for our public transportation options, they're really just concerned about the accessibility, the safety, and a lot of people just lack the knowledge on how to genuinely use our public transportation. And then when we were asked, do you think the city does a satisfactory job? It was very mixed signals, but for the most part, it was very just, nobody really knows. So with that, we just wanted to thank you guys for giving us access and supporting Tempe teens with our free transit passes. It really helps us a lot. I use the bus every day to school, to work, then back home. So it really, so helpful. So we just wanted to, some of our suggestions were to increase the shade on a lot of our bus routes, because it does make it very uncomfortable. It is very hot here. And other terms of vegetation, such as a community garden, addressing the efficiency of public transportation and education to potential youth passengers. I remember at the very beginning when we did reset all of our bus routes, they were running more or less on time. But now that that's kind of a couple of months out, it's very much so, they dropped a route, so now we're 30 minutes late. That's okay. So that one, and then creating a community program to distribute bikes and other non-gas powered vehicles, residents during Bike Month, just to keep the environment nice. You know how it goes.
So having heard all of the kind of suggestions that MIAC has for you all this year, we'd like to kind of go into what our anticipated impact is and what we'd like to see the result be and what we really believe these new strategies would accomplish. So we believe that the anticipated impact would be firstly to help us better meet the needs of young people in Tempe, of our peers. We also think that this is going to be incredibly beneficial in increasing positive youth engagement with Tempe, something that's a goal not only of the City Council, but also of MIAC. And I know that that's something that you all really like to see from us too. So we believe that our programs and our suggestions this year will help to meet the goals of the wider Tempe as well as these individual councils. Thank you. Okay. We'd also like to say a quick thank you to all of you for the support that the City of Tempe as well as City Council has given us. We'd like to thank you for restoring MIAC's original base budget, and would like to solicit your continued support for youth-led social media efforts and allowing us to continue to be part of the decision-making process and giving us these opportunities. We're incredibly thankful to everything that the City Council has done for each of us individually, as well as through our program. And we are very thankful for the opportunity to continue to represent the youth of our city. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the presentation. Let me first turn to Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you for coming and presenting to us today. It was great to participate in your town hall. Certainly, you guys asked a lot of pretty thoughtful and sometimes deep questions, right, that I kind of wasn't anticipating, but you really kind of kept me on my heels. And it was a lot of fun to engage with you folks. I'm always impressed when people your age are involved in not only politics and public policy, but certainly at the city level too, because that's something that doesn't often get as much attention as kind of the larger issues, the federal issues and state issues. So I can tell you, when I was your age, I was concerned with playing EverQuest and Frosted Tips. I certainly wasn't, addressing my local city government or doing any sort of work in that regard at all. So I'm always very, very impressed when young folks take some initiative in the trajectory of the city. So kudos to you and the work you've done. These suggestions are all very thoughtful and I think very doable. So you guys have done some good work, and congratulations to you on that. Really appreciate you taking the time to the volunteerism that you've demonstrated and to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Any other Councilmember Garland and Councilmember Arredondo Savage?
I'd just like to say the same thing. I think it's wonderful that you are participating and that you are paying attention and that you care and that you're here. I think that's really important for us to be able to hear your voice. So thank you very much. And I just had one thought or suggestion. The Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community has a program called Young River People's Council. And I just thought it might be really nice if you guys would reach out to them and just got together and did something together, or even just met to talk about what each one of your youth groups are doing. So just a thought, put that out there to you. But you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, guys. I certainly do appreciate it, not only to you, but everybody I think that participated, all those people on the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission. You guys do really great work, and it's really important. There's been a lot of things that have changed in the city of Tempe because of your feedback and your input. So it's definitely one of the things that we listen to, we hear you, and we take action when we can. So thank you for that. And I just want to say thank you to Adrian and Mary. I know you guys work with them very closely. And you guys are able to do a lot of really great things, I think, because of their passion and commitment to what you do. So thank you both for your continued work. I really do certainly appreciate that. And the one thing I want to just focus on really quick here is you mentioned a lot about the environmental sustainability slide, and you talked about transportation. I'm actually the representative for the city of Tempe at Valley Metro. So this information is really helpful because we're right now in the new budget cycle, we are really looking to do a big regional campaign in regards to making sure our riders really know and understand how to utilize bus services, rail, and the new streetcar. So this to me is like very important, really good information. And the fact that you have 37.5% of people that really don't know anything about transportation, that's one thing that we need to change. So I would really love to get more of that background information. So I'm going to talk to you guys and to Adrian and make sure that we share it with Valley Metro. So I think it's really important to hear from the youth of our community because you are our riders and you are our future riders, and it's really important, I think, when we talk about sustainability to ensure that you guys are able to get to where you need to go, when you need to go, because it is really freedom for you. So thank you for that. I love all the things that you do and the things that you talked about, youth specialists. That's kind of something near and dear to my heart, and it's kind of been a work in progress, ensuring that we get those on all of the campuses and try to keep them in our middle school. So I really do appreciate that you all brought those up. So please just thank you for what you do. Continue to be vocal, continue to be engaged and speak up. I think I was kind of like Randy. I don't think I was playing video games. I don't even know if I had Atari. I don't know if that what I would have played, but I'm sure I was doing some things that were not as productive as what you were all doing. So I want to say thank you for what you guys do and continue to stay involved and engaged. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, no, absolutely outstanding, guys. We've been up here for a number of years between me and Mayor Woods, but just to see the progressions of the youth council, just kind of giving us, their feedback from that perspective, and we've had even people grow up and run for Congress and from that position. So it's been quite well done. So it's great to see you guys here and being involved, and I think it's great that you're involved. And he has some great ideas, and I think that. Some of these ideas are doable. The youth council, specialist is something that we need to improve on and get more in there, because I can totally see that. Mom being a teacher and understanding all of those things to help the students out to really kind of engage. I think that's a much needed program. We are doing some other things like the shade on the bus stops. We do want to aggressively go for that. Tree canopies, we do want to aggressively go for that. That's something that I know that both me and Councilmember Kuby, I like to save trees as much as I can, but we need to improve on those things. The things about gas powered, yes, we are trying to initially start that to help reduce, or not reduce, but go to electric. So that is something that we want to do as a city, and I know that we have that in our plan going forward. I'm pushing for that, and I want to see those things happen. So I want to tell you, thank you guys for coming up here and voicing your opinions and telling us what is needed. It's outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. Councilmember Kuby.
So we need to ask the question, where are you guys going to school next year? Those that are graduating.
Oh, so we're graduating from MIAC. We haven't graduated yet
Oh,
from high
you're not
school. We're going to be
seniors.
seniors.
Okay.
So that's.
You're
I'm going to be a senior, so Sean is actually a little bit younger, so she has some time. I'm the one who's headed out within the next year.
So I hope you'll consider the College of Global Futures at ASU, because I think you'd be inspired with your fellow students and all that they're accomplishing in the world. I'm thinking about a young woman. I just met with her yesterday, Kim Pearson, and she was one of the first sustainability students. And she came before council and spoke out years and years ago. And her new job is to lead micro-mobility work for the state of Washington. And I was so proud of her and proud to know that the work she was doing in sustainability is having impact now in the state of Washington. So I have a feeling you guys are going to be great influences in your generation. And it's my commitment and my hope that we will live up to your vision, because the decisions we're making today impact your generation far more than they impact my generation. I know I'm the oldest one on the council, but you guys, you're getting up there in age too. And I know, as Councilmember Navarro mentioned, just the youth the input about the shaded bus stops. The council looked at our plan for our shading our bus stops, and we said we need to really supercharge this. It's not enough to get there by 2030, 2040. We need to really, we know that shade is intricately connected to transportation, and we can't have a successful transportation system without a shaded pathways. So you had impact already. And I know many of you are also involved with the climate action planning, and that has been really important. I know that food access was an issue that came up again and again when we met with young people to discuss climate action. So thank you. It's not just MIAC, but you led other initiatives and other planning processes that had great impact with the city. So thanks so much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kuby. Just really quickly on my end, council members all said it all exceptionally well. The one thing I was going to say is, when we talk about how many times what we're doing up here is not just simply preparing for the present, but also preparing for the future, and looking out, at the Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission is always a very stark reminder of that, about how we have to look forward to not just the community that we have, but the community that we aspire to be. And just one example I'll point out to make sure that this is brief: the streetcar that's going to be opening on May 20th in a couple of weeks, which is going to be free for the first year. And really, it's for a lot of the same reasons that we talk about giving free youth bus passes. It's because we're trying to get our young people comfortable with the concept of riding public transportation and getting around without the use of single-use automobiles. It's one of the reasons why I personally moved into the downtown in Tempe, was so I could actually walk around and not have to drive everywhere. But I love the days when I'm completely on foot and I don't have to be in a car at all. I know it's better for the planet. It's also better for my health. So I really enjoy that. But the streetcar, just as a note, and every council member up here knows this, for years, and we still get this. I mean, I get it on my Facebook page every now and then, or we get, the occasional council communicator saying, I don't understand the streetcar. Why would you build the streetcar? I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. It's the trolley to nowhere. All of these things that people say. But the reason why we build things like that is because it's not a trolley to nowhere. It's a starter line that's eventually going to connect, probably most likely to the city of Mesa and to other surrounding communities to create a true regional transit system. But someone has to start first. And I'm always glad that the city of Tempe is willing to be that city that wants to be innovative and be first. But the fact of the matter is, those decisions about the Mill Avenue modern streetcar and light rail and bus rapid transit and those decisions that we make, they are for the people who are currently here, but it's frankly for you. And I know when I go to speak at schools, when I talk to younger people in the community, whether in middle school or high school or in college, none of you ask those questions about why would you build the streetcar? Why would you build all of these public transportation systems? Because you get it. You understand this is what has to happen when you live in the fastest growing county in the entire country, and tons of people are moving here every day. We are no longer a small town. We are not a small region. We're a major metropolitan area. And in order to live a life where you can get people around without the use of single-use automobiles, to avoid traffic issues, and to make sure we're creating a much more environmentally sustainable world moving forward for us, for you, for your children, we have to create these kinds of systems. And so I just appreciate you highlighting that and talking about the need for public transportation, when it comes for not just for traffic issues, but also because it's the right thing to do from a climate justice standpoint as well. So I just want to say thank you for always getting it and for always really pushing us to do even better, and just really appreciate all of your efforts. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, next up. Item 3C, fiscal year 2022-23 budget review session follow-up, and I see Tom Dunsing and Mark Day.
Would you like to run your own? Sure. Okay.
Vice Mayor, members of council, good evening. My name is Tom Dunsing. I'm interim deputy city manager, and I'm joined here by Mark Day, municipal budget director. Tonight, we're here to follow up on several items council identified at the April 21st work study session. That was the initial review of the proposed city manager's budget. Based on your feedback tonight, the plan is to come back on May 26th with the tentative budget and finalize it June 9th. And there were several questions tonight. Councilmember Kuby, we will get to those. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Day.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mark Day, Municipal Budget Director. Although both the operating and capital budgets address various city council priorities and performance measures, tonight's presentation, as well as our public-facing budget process in general, contribute to our goal of transparency in financial reporting and disclosure of information. That's performance measure 2.11 under council priorities, strong community connections. So at the April 21st work study session, council asked us to perform a feasibility analysis of moving 4 general fund supplementals from the not recommended list to the recommended list. So for the feasibility analysis, staff reviewed each of the 4 supplemental requests with the impacted departments to determine, first of all, if there were potential revenue and/or expenditure offsets to help reduce the fiscal impact of the supplementals. And then, were there alternative service delivery methods to accomplish the objectives of the funded program or service in a more cost-effective method without diminishing the services provided? So, for example, could we utilize wage employees or contract services versus hiring a regular permanent employee? So based on our analysis, staff is recommending that 3 of the 4 supplementals be funded as proposed. Those would be the Crisis Intervention Specialist, which is 1 regular full-time position for the Human Services Mental Health Response Team, known as MyHeart. The Fire Medical Rescue Mental Health and Wellness Program, which will utilize a licensed mental health provider to deliver services. And then the third one was the Sustainability and Resilience Program Specialist. This is one FTE that will focus on energy equity programs and solutions. So for the fourth supplemental, the Middle School Youth Specialist Program, staff is recommending funding this with some modifications. So the original supplemental was submitted for 6 full-time positions with recurring funding to be offset 50% by the Tempe Elementary District. However, the district funding would only be on a year-by-year basis, so they can only commit to 1 year at a time. Staff in the district assess the staffing model required to provide mental health support services for middle school students in the Tempe Elementary District. Staff is recommending one-time funding for 5 full-time temporary wage positions, with the district offsetting 50% of the cost for 4 positions and 100% of the cost for 1 position the district would provide grant funding for. Also, ASU interns will be utilized to supplement the youth specialist positions. Staff will evaluate the program next year and determine whether to continue with a temporary wage position model or move towards full-time regular positions. So either of those options would require a supplemental to be submitted for next year's budget process, fiscal year 23-24.
So Mayor and Council, before I get to the last item on this slide, a couple things. I wanted to follow up with a question we had at the last work study session regarding the best employees. We learned this week that the grant is ending June 30th. I also reached out to the departments employing the best employees. The employment will not end for the best employees. So I can tell you, each one of the departments I talked to, very satisfied with the work that's done, and there is absolute commitment to continue funding those for the foreseeable future, especially in facilities, which those 2 employees are kind of near and dear to my heart. The other thing is, Councilmember Kuby had a question regarding agency review. We were scrambling around a little bit. It's our understanding agency review was increased from $800,000 a year to $1 million a year back in 17-18, and it's held steady at that amount since. Finally, the last bullet point on this item, I understand that the City Manager Ching had something to say on this, so I'll defer to City Manager.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Apologize. The question was raised at the last work study session about the commitment to fund Super Bowl 52 host committee activities by the city of Tempe. A couple things to note about this. This is in addition to, I believe, $300,000 that was already committed by our Tempe Tourism Board. Subsequent to the meeting, I had discussions with the executive director of Tempe Tourism, Mr. Michael Martin, and I want to thank him for his willingness to think about this more. He, on his own volition, came up with a plan that he has brought to his board today, literally like half an hour ago. And I got word that they are willing to use their Prop 302 dollars, which is through Cactus League and regional sports, to fund the amount that was otherwise obliged to the city of Tempe. So this was something that they came up with on their own. He felt that this was a tourism-related activity and therefore should be the obligation of Tempe Tourism. So I want to thank Mr. Martin and his willingness to do so. I present that to you as an alternative funding as opposed to using general fund.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Really appreciate it. I have one quick thing, and I know this is a very quick pivot, so we may, and stop me if I'm off track here. But so I'm curious, we already had that $187,740 already budgeted with that letter of commitment, and now the Tempe Tourism Office is going to be taking care of that. And I want to extend my thanks to Michael Martin as well and the members of his board for approving that. Is there a way to take that money that we now have freed up and dedicate that money to human services?
Mayor, members of the council, this gets to Council Member Kuby's last question is you certainly have the ability to change that at this point.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Councilmember Kuby?
Thank you, and thank you so much, City Manager Ching, for bringing this up with Michael Martin, and we've had some really interesting conversations, and I think that, I'm very pleased that they were so respectful that they realize there's a lot of demands and needs in our city now, human service needs. And so I'm just really tickled that we found a solution and kept us within our commitments as well. And as regards to the agency review, I believe, yes, so we did increase the amount, but I think it's true, and Linda Martin mentioned that needs have gone up and requests have gone up. So we've been kind of level funding, but we know inflation's gone up, and we also know the needs have gone up in the community. So if the council is interested, I would like to see that $188,000 move towards additional funding for agency review, that the agency review members apportion according to their formula.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Arredondo Savage and Vice Mayor Keating.
Yeah, not a problem. I definitely don't have a problem with that. I think that's a great idea. The only one thing is, as I know this is one-time funding, and I just don't want to cuff the hands of the council that's going to be here next year and work through that. I just want to ensure that, I think that's great, let's do it, and let them go ahead and allocate those dollars. Just let them know that this is a one-time fund, and then we'll readdress it throughout the year, and then hopefully it'll be part of the budget in the future if that's what the future council chooses to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Vice Mayor Keating.
Mayor, Councilmember Arredondo Savage said exactly what I was going to say. So I imagine Doreen will say the same thing, and again, it's not planned.
Well, let's find out. Councilmember Garland?
I agree with exactly what they were saying.
Oh, see, he was right. He was right. So, awesome. Okay, sounds good. No, and I think it's a very important point. I think that, this would be, one-time funding, and we can obviously at some point, I know you were talking, Councilmember Cubie, about eventually looking at raising that, the funding, whatever, on an annual basis. But yeah, we can have that conversation at a different point. But yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
City Manager Ching took my speaking point on that last bullet point. Thank you very much. And so we'll go to our last slide.
Okay, this slide shows the budgetary impact of including the 4 supplementals as recommended for funding. The total is $415,000 with $219,000 in recurring funding, $196,000 in one-time. So for next fiscal year, we had established a general fund contingency of $4.3 million. We are recommending that this amount be reduced to $3.9 million to fund these supplementals.
So with that, Mayor, members of the council, we look for your direction.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, we threw a lot of things at you guys that I would say at the last meeting and the meeting before that. We've talked about a lot of things, and you guys really came through and I think addressed a lot of our concerns and figured out a way to fund the things that we believe are really important and priorities. And then I think with what's going on with the Super Bowl dollars, I think it just really works to, meets my expectations 100%. So thank you to both you, Tom and Mark. You guys really rocked into your team. I know there's a team that goes behind it, and it's really nice to be able to know that we kind of have a fairly healthy budget. And I think that we are addressing a lot of needs of this community, and I couldn't be prouder of where we're at. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Councilmember Cubie.
Sorry. Our friends who came to speak today from Semillas and from La Victoria, and those who were at the People's Budget Forums, over 400 people you mentioned. Is that it, Sarah? It's really impressive. And since we are still in the process of negotiating, we have we're not approving our final budget till what date in June?
Mayor, members of the council, tentative budget adoption, May 26th, final adoption, June 9th.
Right. So we still are in the process, correct? If we bring up some potential changes, but I'm thinking about 2 sort of big events, I want to say shocks to the system that are happening in Tempe. You could say it's a good shock, you could say it's not a good shock, but one I'm thinking of is the mill project. And we're currently negotiating with a developer on the mill, and we're working very carefully. Councilmember Garland and I met with some folks this morning at the mill to discuss some of the issues related to the spiritual and cultural significance of the mountain to SRP, MIC community. And so we have the mill project that's happening, and we do have the Climate Justice and Indigenous Land Stewardship program that's not funded, but if that program is to be funded, I can't think of a better year for it to be funded, even if it is like just a pilot, because we're going to be facing those issues of how we steward the land and one of the most sacred sites of the SRP MIC in this coming year. And so I wanted to see whether council might be willing to look at ways we can fund the climate justice and indigenous land stewardship, because it's so pointedly important in this coming year that we do this mill project right. I mean, this is iconic for our city, and it's also incredibly important to SRP MIC communities. So that's one thing. And the other thing, we all are aware of the impact of the closing of Food City, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for having the council and for you jumping on that so quickly. And we purchased that land, and there are plans for developing, and we want to make sure there's food access there, and that there's groceries, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a big grocery store or an Albertsons and a Fry's, but it could be a number of grocery stores that would fill the needs of the community. I recently became aware and spent some time at Don Filos, and it is not just a grocery store, it is a community center, and it's a warm, wonderfully inviting community center on Apache. And along with Don Filos is an Asian food market, 26 years in existence, and Haji Baba. I know we all love Haji Baba and been there as well. And so all these three markets and restaurants are really impacted because that land, that development is up for sale. So Don Filos recently moved to that location, and they're potentially going to be kicked out again. So there's a potential to look at that issue. So that's like, I talked about the Mill Avenue being a shock, a shock to the system, good or bad. This one's a shock to the system that isn't good for the community, especially the people of La Victoria and Escalante. And to me, the food forest and backyard garden position would be able to work with the community to ensure that there's greater food access for the community, and to maybe be a part of the discussion that we're going to have about Food City and what happens there, what transpires there. I mean, if everything were perfect and worked out beautifully, those three markets could find a home in the Food City development, and that would be a beautiful thing. But again, like to have a backyard garden and food forest specialist to help the community, we know that the young people that participate in our climate action plan, food access was so important and so defined. And I think I've heard a lot of issues about the produce truck that has been visiting the community. It's not accessible to people. There's issues of having to show your ID. There's issues of people that are in the shadows that may not want to step out and work and go to an official distribution point at TCAA. We love the food distribution at Tempe Community Action Agency, but we all know that you need to go where people are and not necessarily expect people to come to you. That's not access, to expect people to come to you. So those two positions, the climate justice and indigenous land stewardship, related to the mill project, and then the backyard garden and food forest, related to what's happening with food access in Northeast Tempe, to me, they have like a resonance here. And yeah, did I bring it up in the last session? No, I did not. But having met with residents over the past few weeks and just sensing that sort of the vision that we have for the city, I realize those positions could come back to the future council and maybe they get funded next year. But to me, there's an urgency of now. And I'm wondering if my council colleagues would look at those positions and see if they could come back to us and see how we can use further contingency funding, because we know we have more contingency funding in the budget than we typically do, to prepare for important signature funding needs. I'm wondering if you'd consider those positions and have them come back and see how we could fund them.
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie.
Sorry to be so wordy.
Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate it. I look at it and I know, Lauren, I totally appreciate your passion. And I got to tell you, I don't want to continue moving the goalpost. I feel like we have really worked through this budget. I think that our department heads, our directors have done a phenomenal job really working together and addressing some of our current concerns, bringing back all of our FTEs that were frozen before. I mean, we are in a really good place, and I certainly understand. And I know that the closure of Food City is a really big loss. And we have a great partnership with Activate Food Arizona. And I know Mrs. Inchausti is very familiar with them, and I had a chance to just chat with her a little bit about maybe hopefully including them. I believe that you're having a meeting there next week, and to really get Elisa Lyons and her team on board to really maybe even have a bigger role there. So I think that there's definitely opportunities. But at the same time, as much as I appreciate you bringing these ideas forward, I'm very comfortable with the way the budget is now. I think that is very, very fair. It's kind of gone through the gauntlet already. And so today I will just tell you, no, I do not support those changes and additions and would like to see the budget move forward as we see right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adonda Savage. I got a quick question actually for Tom and Mark. Can you give a dollar amount for those two positions? Just, I'm just curious as to what numbers we're talking about.
So, Mayor, members of council, the climate justice and indigenous land stewardship position, the total cost is $97,450. 4,000 of that is one time. The rest is recurring. For the backyard garden program and food forest program, those two are 50,000 each, one time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councilmember Cubie.
Yeah, and I wasn't having any intention of having us decide tonight. That's not what we did last week when we talked about, or last time when we talked about the energy equity position. It's still bringing it up because I'm very aware that the process is not finalized yet, that we're still within the process. So moving the goalposts, I don't know. I mean, we get more community input, right? And we're more focused, and we get all council packets, and we're focused on this process as it goes through, but some people get involved sort of later in the game, and they hear more things and they get engaged, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great thing that we have folks from La Victoria here who are speaking out because, you know, that is, you know more than I. You've been a longer time resident in Tempe than I, but La Victoria has been a community that not necessarily has faced the best of what we are in the city. You know, there's been a lot of stresses and trauma in that community. So, you know, I'm not asking for approval for these two positions tonight. I'm just looking to see where we could accommodate. You know, there's two positions at 50,000, one for the food forest, one for the backyard garden. Maybe it's more about the food forest. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe it's a discussion with Braden and with the community, but to me, we're still in the process. We still can tweak it. And as I said, there are two big issues that they're facing the community now that won't be resolved by these positions, but we'll really put them a step forward and really embrace the opportunity, you know, the crisis and the opportunity that's before us.
Sounds good. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Any other council members' comments or questions? Councilmember Garland.
I was going to say, I don't think that those processes or those things would stop or not happen, or we wouldn't look out for the community if we didn't have those positions. I mean, I'm thinking about the indigenous one. I mean, I like the budget and where our budget is set now, so I'm not really super comfortable with going in and adding something because I know we're going to have to remove something else, and I like what it looks like now. But I'm just thinking that with the indigenous position that we're looking at, I really think that the people that we have working with us right now could continue to make a difference and help move forward the mill project. And obviously, I know, you know, I'm not going to give up on making sure that SRP, MIC, and the indigenous communities around us are all being heard in that position with what's going to be going on at the mill. So I don't really feel like we have to have that position in right now. I don't think that it's something that we have to do that right now, but we could look at the next budget. So I'm comfortable with where we're at. That's just my thought.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Anyone else from council? Comments, questions? So one quick thing on my end, I guess, when I'm thinking about this. So I think that when it comes to Councilmember Garland's point, and I hear what Councilmember Cubie is saying as well, I think that we can find a way. So the Don Field is, I've actually spent quite a bit of time there. I remember during my campaign, like my team and I, we spent a lot of time in that shopping center. I actually still do. And I'm thinking like there could be other ways for the city to address that issue that's not about that specific position. But I think there are other things that we could do to consider to try to find a way to stabilize that business. Because I agree with Councilmember Cubie. You know, all the times that I've been in there, you know, it clearly isn't just simply a restaurant or a place to get food. It really is a kind of a gathering place and a cultural hub. So from my perspective, it's not necessarily about this position, though I do think there are other ways that we can actually address it. And I'm wondering, and I know we've got, I think Councilmember Cubie, we have a meeting coming up, I believe, on the 16th to meet with the community to talk about how we might want to address that. I think there are other ways that we might be able to really help that business. I know we're There's a couple of other businesses that are currently within the city of Tempe who are also experiencing kind of a similar displacement. And I know our staff is currently economic development, community development, even frankly, our real estate broker is helping them secure other places within our community, not just simply saying, oh, well, really saying, look, you may not be here, but we want you to be able to find somewhere else. But I would love to find a way to see if we can keep Don Filos in the exact spot that they're currently in, especially given the fact that they just recently moved there. And we all, from anyone who's actually moved, know how expensive it is and how difficult it is to frankly uproot and go to a new location after you've just settled in another one. So I think there might be some other ways, frankly, to address that, and I would love to meet with the community on the 16th. I think that meeting's already scheduled to talk about what some of the options might be. I'm open to this potentially, but I really would like to meet with the community first and foremost to find out what they might recommend, because this might be a solution, but I think there might be an even greater solution if we kind of put our heads together and try to figure something out. So that's my comment on that one. And I think that regarding to the other position when it comes to the mill, I agree. I mean, I know Councilmember Garland and I recently had a lunch meeting with President Javier from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and have spent time with Vice President Leonard as well, and have really given our commitment, as has everyone on this council, to making sure that that site is really treated with the dignity, frankly, that it deserves. And as a matter of fact, there have been several projects that have been proposed on that mill over the years that have never actually come to fruition. This one is actually the lowest impact project that we've seen so far, where the developer is talking about, look, I want to make sure that I'm working hand in hand with our indigenous communities to make sure that we are properly respecting that land. I want to make sure that we're not putting up buildings that are frankly going to tower over the mill and over the silos, which I think is also critically important when we talk about sight lines, which is really critical to our Native communities and also very critical to many of our longtime residents who've lived here and have talked about, I used to be able to see this mountain or see this thing, and I can't see it anymore because of a lot of the private development. I'm glad that this council made the decision, frankly, to put out an RFP that would get us a project where we're getting local businesses and something that is of a lower scale, where it's a community gathering place. We're incubating local food and beverage concepts and businesses of all different backgrounds and at sort of different points in their life cycle. But at the same time, it's something that really is going to make sure that it is respectful to the indigenous people and the fact that this was their land. And we need to make sure that we are treating it with the respect that it deserves. So I understand the concern about the lateness of the budget, and I do think potentially, as Councilmember Garland said, I think we're already doing a lot of that work with our indigenous community to protect that site and frankly other sites in the community. And I also think, even back to a presentation that myself and Councilmember Cubie and Councilmember Garland were at probably some 5-6 weeks ago, when we had a plaque dedicated to Jacob Butler and the work that he did, an indigenous artist on that site, to really commemorate the Hayden House, the old Monty's restaurant, and its significance not just to the people who've lived here for a long time, but once again to the indigenous people who occupied this land first. And so I think there are ways that we're already doing a lot of that work, and even if these positions aren't funded, our commitment is very much still there, and there are other ways, I think, to potentially accomplish this. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a very thoughtful response. And I really appreciate having these policy discussions, folks. Sometimes we shy away from them or we take things personally, but I think it's important that we be able to discuss it. And it's the most respectful of the people that come to us and want to have us have a discussion and not just, pass over ideas and suggestions.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Any other council members, any further comments or questions? Councilmember Navarro.
No, I just want to agree with you, Mayor. I think it's been said. I think that where the budget is right now, we're on a good path. But with that saying, I know that we listen to our community. We make sure that we try to do as best job as we can. I know that when we go through our budget process throughout the year, we do a lot of this and that and trading up to this point, and it gets very touchy at the 11th hour. But I do know that what we learned from this process, or the needs that we need for the following year, we can absolutely start engaging on those issues and making sure that we're doing our homework correctly and right, with the thoughts of, are we adding more positions? Do we need one more player? Do we need more support behind those scenes? Because oftentimes we talk about positions and adding positions, but there's a support factor that needs to be added too on top of that. And sometimes we need to realize, what are the added costs on that? Let's do it right. and let's make sure that we're going down this road and with more thought to it too. But I absolutely agree with what's being said and what's been said by the community, and I know that we are taking steps forward to a lot of these things when we talk about the stuff that the Mayor Youth Council brought up in terms of shade and counselors and making sure that we take care of our environment with electrical equipment. I think that we're on that process. I know we would love to be there now, and all of us would love to be there now. But I think what we're doing within our city, with our growth, with our development, with the attraction that we're bringing into our community, those are the advantages of this community, the advantage of bringing more money into this community to do these things. We're doing a lot of unique things that other communities are not doing. And I appreciate that people are coming up and saying more and more and more, because we do need to do more and more and more. But we have everything coming in. We have to run a city, and there's so many other obligations that we do have to do within our community. So I just appreciate this conversation, and thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. One other quick point I wanted, and I'll go back to Councilmember Cubie. I just wanted to say too, because we kind of we didn't gloss over it, but very quickly about the Super Bowl funding, and I just wanted to thank the council for that as well. First and foremost, I know Councilmember Cubie brought this issue up at the last meeting about, could there possibly be a better use for that funding? So I appreciate you bringing that up, and we're, had a really good conversation about that this evening. But I also wanted to thank Councilmember Adams, who is our representative on the Tempe Tourism Board. That's actually why she's not here this evening. They're at a very important retreat this weekend, and so she's actually doing that business of the city. And quite honestly, I just wanted to thank her for all of her hard work on this, because quite honestly, without, her support on the Tempe Tourism Board and kind of overseeing a lot of that, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. So I just wanted to make sure to thank Councilmember Adams and Councilmember Cubie, and of course, once again, to our Tempe Tourism CEO, Michael Martin, for all of his hard work and frankly speaking to his board on a very short notice. I know that it's a tough decision when a board has to go back and try to figure out another way to address that needs and still help to prop up tourism in our community, which we very much depend on when it comes to sales tax and bed tax revenue. But at the same time, I know a lot of members of that board, and I know Human Services is also a very big, important concern of theirs. So I'm sure that when this decision was being made, it wasn't simply about the Super Bowl. It was frankly trying to free up this council to have some additional funds to dedicate, frankly, to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So I wanted to give a big shout out to them as well. Councilmember Cubie, my apologies.
As long as we're shouting out to people, Gail Shanks, who came and spoke to us before him, and she made a very eloquent argument as a local business owner and wanting to see that money shift to Human Services. So thank you so much, Gail, for really sparking our attention. And, again, I don't think this is the 11th hour, but we haven't resolved or discussed an issue that was brought up tonight, and that's about conversion of gas-powered landscape equipment to electric equipment. And we know this Tempe has been testing and trying and being a leader in testing a lot of the equipment. And we heard a few years back, it's not ready for prime time. And then we've heard, seen other cities adopting it. And Craig has been just really meticulous. Thank you so much, Craig, for all your work in being the city that stepped up and studied and tested the equipment. So do you know how much that amounts to in the budget, that program?
Councilmember Cubie, it is, I just had this,
$121,147.
Most of that is one time, 120,000 of that's one time.
So again, it's not necessarily taking away from something, because we know we all have a contingency, but we've learned from Kevin Devery, good old Kevin Devery, who is our fleet manager, that maintenance and operation costs of electric cars in this case were far less than gas-powered cars. And the same is true of equipment, landscape equipment, that maintenance and operation costs are far less. You do have battery charges, I realize that, and you have to replace batteries, but it also creates a more healthful environment for the workers that carry this equipment. And then for all of us, because we don't have to breathe in all of the fumes and the emissions that result. So to me, it's a one-time expenditure, and because we're not in the 11th hour, because we're still in the process, that we still have time, I would like us to consider this and have another policy discussion about this, because to me, Tempe leads the way. We do this, other cities do this. We have, the metropolitan area is the 5th worst air quality in the nation. And who's impacted by that? Well, just check out the zip codes, because it's usually, zip codes with poorer communities where health impacts are felt from noxious, from emissions and all the rest. So to me, 100,000 one-time expenditure to try and make this conversion, to lead the valley, we are the city that makes waves in the desert, would be well worth our time because it contributes to a lot of external benefits, including a healthier community. So, Council, I look to you and see whether you'd be willing to consider this conversion. We know we're going to do it eventually, right? We're ready. So is this the time?
Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Navarro?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I don't know, well, what I can talk about, but I thought we were exploring, obviously exploring this, and obviously I thought we were going to explore to have a timeline to address our contracts to convert electric. And I don't know if that process is in the works, or do we have a potential idea of maybe a discussion, or maybe is that something we're still in the works of discussing? Is that, I say that because we're talking about this issue, but if we have a timeline for conversion, because I know that all of our contracts out there do the maintenance and everything and whatnot. So it's on to the third party to convert. So then the contracts have to be, I would imagine, somewhat redone because of cost or whatever it may be to provide that service. And I don't know where that is in our timeline. And I don't know if we have a chance to answer that question today.
Mayor, Council, I think Craig Hayton.
Craig's like, I almost got through.
Mayor, Council, Craig Hayton, Deputy Community Services Director. I appreciate the questions. And the contract pieces, most of that work is done through engineering and transportation contracts with the right-of-way. The specific request through the supplemental process was parks conversion at this point. So that's where our focus has been. Doesn't mean that there isn't a discussion on what that looks like. I can't speak to that personally, but I know that we've looked at it on both different ways.
So right-of-ways, we're already on that track?
I can't speak for the transportation team, but this was a specific parks component for staff-run equipment.
So I guess with that, I don't know, maybe more presentation, more depth. I don't know if that needs to happen, but I'm, like I said, and it's probably been said, I am comfortable where the budget is. I know that this is near and dear to my heart to get this converted because I wanted to make sure before, if anything, within a certain time frame that we can make sure that we are doing our due diligence in trying to convert to electric going forward. So I'll leave that for discussion, but I am comfortable where what we have to do, but what it means is what are we taking from what to do what?
Well,
Thank you.
that's an sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Councilmember Cubie.
I'm sorry. I mean, that would be an answer for our budget analysts. But again, to me, these investments, they save money in the future and they create healthier workforce, a healthier workforce and healthier environment for our employees. And note that, Craig, I have such gratitude for you as I conclude my term, quack, quack, lame duck. No, just the Stonyfield Farm grant that was received, and then Safeway matched it because we were studying the application of non-herbicides to control weeds. Like you've taken just a scientific approach to this. I'm so grateful for that. To me, like we know this conversion is happening. Do we want to be at the beginning end of it? Do we want to start saving immediately and helping our community, improving our community health? Or do we want to wait a year or not, or maybe more? It just seems to me like the time is now, and I would like to hear from our budget analysts, like where would that money come from? Because we do have an enhanced contingency fund that is beyond what we typically do in a city, and if there's an opportunity for one-time funding, then I really think we should consider it. And I thank the residents for pushing us tonight.
Let me ask you a really quick question, though, before Tom and Mark, and not to preempt Councilmember Cubie's question. I want to just sort of check with the council, though, just to make sure, that if they want to hear more about this or they want to talk about adding this into the budget, I just want to make sure I ask them and kind of do things in order. So, Councilmember Garland?
I guess I have a question about that. So the contingency fund, is there funding that we have now in this year's budget that's left over? That's something that we could do, then we wouldn't be adjusting our budget, because again, I'm comfortable with our budget and where we're at.
That I definitely will turn to Tom and Mark and ask them.
Mayor, members of the council, I had to look to the guy who knew the answer. Currently in this year's contingency, there's roughly about $500,000 left.
Okay. Councilmember Navarro?
To that, I know that with contingencies, don't departments often ask for their request to finish out their year for various things? If it's just sitting there, that's a different thing. But are there requests out there already for that funds, for those monies?
Mayor, members of council, I'm not aware of any requests for that contingency.
Okay. Then council, I'll ask what your pleasure is on this one. You know, Councilmember Cubey's made her request, but I wanted to see what you think, and
Mayor, I'm fine with the budget the way it is. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Thank you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. Anyone else? Councilmember Cubey?
Councilmember Adams isn't here, and I don't want to speak for her, but we have spoken about this issue on our committee. So I tend to think she's in favor of it if we're going to defer this to another meeting. And I'm not sure if Councilmember Garland, if you, knowing what you heard about the contingency budget for this year, if that makes you more amenable to that expenditure taking place this year. And the same thing with you, Councilmember Navarro, if you'd be interested in that possible solution to the funding issue using contingency that has not been spent for this year, that is not accounted for.
I would say for me, I'm comfortable with where our budget sets for next year, but I am willing to listen to the ability or the opportunity or the possibility of that being spent out of this year's. If it's a one-time only cost that we were talking about, again, I'd like to know how that all happens, but I'm comfortable with us leaving the budget that we have set now, and then look at that for this time.
Thank you. Councilmember DeVar?
No, I agree with that. And just to that point is just the explanation on where that money this year we have right now, how it's being used, or if it's being used, or if it's just going to sit there.
Mayor, members of the council, if the funding for contingency is not used, it just rolls to fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay, so it rolls over to the next year's budget, correct?
The budget does not roll forward. The funding just goes to fund balance, and it would eventually then that's available for future appropriation.
Okay. My perspective on this is, I mean, I think that Craig, you talked about how we're already implementing this in parks. This is already basically we're already kind of making and right of ways. We're already kind of initiating that transition from gas powered to electric. Is that correct?
Mayor, members of council, the supplemental request is a full conversion one time within parks. We are allocating new equipment as we transition it out to electric blowers within parks specifically. I know that there was a Friday packet. I'll have to search back for some information on what the engineering and transportation team had identified, what they anticipated the conversion would cost from a contract perspective. Okay. We're doing it as new equipment needs to be brought on. This supplemental is for a full conversion for the existing parks equipment.
Okay. Yeah. My thought, and I will say, I don't know if I've got consensus here yet, but my perspective on this is, if we're already heading down that path and we're basically taking things out of service as we're taking things out of service as they kind of reach the end of their useful life cycle, I've got to imagine within probably the next 1.5, 2 years, whatever, probably almost all of that equipment will be out of service anyway, I imagine. A lot of the old gas-powered stuff.
Mayor, we can certainly research that. I would anticipate within the next 5 would be my guess offhand, just based on the couple of years that we've been transitioning, and we could probably get 5 to 10 years out of equipment as it is. Okay. With a repair team.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my perspective is also that, I mean, I'm generally comfortable with the budget where it currently is, but if there's additional information you can bring back regarding, and obviously transportation and engineering about that would be helpful. But generally speaking, I feel like a lot of it's already going out pretty quickly. Like the city has a lot of acceleration models that we funded that really are trying to take a lot of these kind of older technologies and things that really don't contribute to a healthy environment out of service as quickly as possible. And so, my perspective is we're probably on the right path and moving pretty quickly on those, given the fact that I know all of the acceleration models were funded for the upcoming year, to my knowledge. So that's kind of my position. I sort of feel like we're probably where we already need to be, but I mean, if there's additional information that you have or that transportation can bring back, I'm happy to take a look at it.
To that point, Mr. Mayor, I don't think 5 to 10 years is very quick. I mean, there's still the planned purchase of gas-powered equipment. So, when we know electric is up to par and is greatly needed, so there's still it's not like it's transitioning out and we'll be buying new stuff. We're still going to be buying electric stuff if we don't make that one-time purchase and really commit to it.
Right. Could we bring some additional information back at the next meeting about this, though?
Mayor, members of council, we're just talking about that. Mr. Hayton can put something together for Friday packet on sort of the conversion to electric.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anything else, council? No? Okay. Once again, thank you so much. We're once again, first budget hearing against Tom on May 26th and final adoption on June 9th?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sounds good.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, item 3D, equity in action update. Looks like we have Shauna Warner here.
And I have a
Got some virtual friends with you as well?
friends. Yes.
Perfect.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Braden Kay, Sustainability and Resilience Director, and here with Shauna Warner. We're here to provide you an update on Equity in Action, which was funded as a partnership through the Innovation Fund, as well as through a donation or funding from the Vitalist Health Foundation. So we're here with you tonight to talk about opportunities for action, the outcomes of the pilot project, a review of the work that was done by our residents and city staff, as well as the work that needs to be done to transition this work to our new Chief Equity Officer. I just want to start by thanking deeply the residents and professionals that participated in Equity in Action, as well as the city staff that has been very dedicated to partnering and seeing this work through. It's been several years of hard work examining how we do engagement and how we try to do more equitable policy making. And we certainly have gotten attention from around the country for doing this work. And Janae Harrison and Shauna and Rose and I have been asked to speak about this work at national conferences and from other municipal colleagues around the country. So we're excited to be able to share with you the work that's been done and to celebrate the efforts of all of the residents and folks that have been involved in this process. And with that, I'll pass it over to Shauna to explain the framework and the work we've been doing.
Okay, thank you, Braden. And good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Shauna Warner, Neighborhood Services Manager. So our Equity in Action project was tied to our feeling invited to participate in City Decisions performance measure. And as Braden has referenced, it was a collaboration between our community partners, Vitalist Health Foundation, as well as our offices of Sustainability and Resilience, Neighborhood Services, and Strategic Management and Diversity. We did have 4 main goals: to create equitable engagement tools for public involvement plans, to create equity metrics for action and policy plans, to create programs, policies, and infrastructure that reflect the diversity and values of Tempe, and to create a framework to achieve equity in decision-making. So we will give an overview of the draft framework. The purpose behind it is to achieve equity in decision-making by really increasing our participation of underrepresented residents. It's going to serve as a guide in how we approach equitable engagement. The framework is currently in draft form. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but we are testing it with different pilot projects. And the shaping of it was a collaborative process with our community partners. And again, it will be further developed by our city's new Chief Equity Officer. It is meant to be a living document and updated as we begin applying the framework to policies and practices. So key to the framework are values that were identified through group conversations and a series of interviews with Equity in Action participants. I do want to just briefly describe these values, as I think they're important as we guide all of our participation efforts. By accountability, we want to create a community that values responsibility during the process and accountability for the results of our actions. By diversity, we want to create a community that reflects the diversity of our city and centers healing the wounds of historical exclusion by valuing and celebrating differences. By collaboration, we want to create a community that values healthy, open, and honest communication where everyone in the community is welcome to join in partnership. By accessibility, we must break barriers and build bridges as a community. Inclusion, we recognize it's not only important to have different people in the room, but to also make sure they feel empowered to speak honestly for themselves and for their communities. We honor the strength it takes to talk through difference and commit to creating a space that challenges tokenism. Empathy, we want to create a space where humanity matters, where we center humanity, dignity, and compassionate understanding. Liberation, we value freedom and want to create a space where community members feel free to be themselves. We commit to understanding intersectional oppression and to centering equity in community work and action. Equity and egalitarianism, we value fairness, individual context, and experience. We understand that equality is not always fair for those on the margins, so we must center equity and justice as we try to meet the needs of our community. Transparency, we want to create a community where our constituents trust our ability to make decisions for the betterment of the whole, especially for frontline communities. Service, we want to create a community that cares deeply about each other by engaging in charitable, philanthropic, and reparative action meant to heal the community. Safety, we want to create a community where everyone, everywhere feels and is safe. We are committed to listening, building, and maintaining trust with those that are not safe, centering marginalized communities. So part of the framework includes the spectrum of community engagement to ownership. And this tool was developed by Rosa Gonzalez of Facilitating Power, and in part drawing on content from a number of public participation tools, including the spectrum that exists in the city's current public involvement manual. And it was developed on the idea that thriving, diverse, equitable communities are possible through deep participation, particularly by communities commonly not involved. And the spectrum provides stages to help the city recognize where we are at and sets goals for where we can go together with the community. As part of the framework, the coalition also identified conditions needed for vulnerable and marginalized groups to participate in public engagement processes that promote safety. And those conditions were creating an inclusive space, meeting people where they are at, providing easy access, holding a transparent process, centering marginalized and vulnerable people, and promoting community-centered safety. And overall, there are several groups that have been disadvantaged, either socioeconomically or otherwise by gender, age, racial, or ethnic inequities in society. As a result, there is a heightened sensitivity to decisions made within systems due to the barriers they can experience. The coalition identified these 9 groups that should be prioritized in Tempe decision-making to ensure that they can realize benefits and not be harmed by decisions made. Ultimately, when we're supporting these communities on the margins, there is a universal benefit for the entire community. And although not listed in the framework graphic, the coalition also identified places as being on the margins in Tempe where these vulnerable groups often live. And these places should be prioritized as most vulnerable to development and displacement. And then Braden's going to give a brief overview of the projects that we've been working on and testing the framework.
So one of the things we did when we set up this project is we knew that in enacting the framework or co-creating the framework wasn't going to be enough, that there was really a need to have some additional funding for pilot projects so that action is possible and that we could test the framework through action. And so one of the projects is alternative to police that Human Services has been leading with work from Care 7 with the leadership of Octavia Harris and Paul Bentley and the support of Naomi. And that work is continuing now with the roundtable, who are going to trainings and doing more listening and understanding of how to provide services and how to improve Care 7's work. We also had a pilot project on participation in the budget process. So Mark Day and his team worked in conversation with the roundtable on understanding the budget process They then went out and created public engagements on the budget process. Equity in Action funded the process, and then the process ended up resulting in the separate people's budget, which was not technically a part of what was funded. The process was funded, but really appreciate the work of the budget office in working with the residents that worked on that project. Mark Wittenberg and some of Shauna's staff, including Brenda Clark, have been working with Rosa and Chousty on our municipal internet pilot project. We've connected with ASU, who are helping us do some digital equity research and community outreach events to understand how we can bridge the digital divide by increasing broadband in certain areas and by figuring out how to improve digital literacy. So that's been a work in progress currently. Really want to thank the clerk's office for their work on looking at city council processes. For instance, changing when in a meeting speakers come, trying to find out how we can improve city council meetings to increase participation and inclusiveness. There was also work done to look at the intersection of structural racism and public health outcomes. This work is aligned with the amazing work that Human Services has been doing on social determinants of health, as well as work that Breanne Fisher is leading on regional resilience and the intersection of resilience with equity issues. So some great overlaps with our work there. And then Shauna's going to tell you a little bit more about the experiential tours and innovations in outreach work that her office and others have been working on with community partners. And with that, I'll pass it back to Shauna.
Okay, so as Braden mentioned, we are still within our test phasing, so I'm going to highlight one of our projects, but it is still, all the work is still continuing, and this one is not quite done yet as well. But this was suggested by one of our Equity in Action Coalition members that lives in the Victory Acres neighborhood, and just really told the story of walking the neighborhood with him and seeing what his experience was and what he sees within there. And so this walking audit was the culmination of months of work done in the neighborhood prior, and that was done in conjunction with coalition members, Rail CDC. They also partnered with Semillas Arizona, as well as neighborhood leaders, to host events, meeting neighbors where they were without city's participation, and building that trust within the community so they'd feel welcome to participate. And I'm just going to walk through a little bit about what they shared that they found during the walking tour. These are some of the highlights, and again, they're still putting the recommendations together, so we'll be sharing these further with staff and others. And here's just some pictures of the walking audit as well as what they found. This is the Victory Acres neighborhood that's east of Price and north of Apache. Sidewalks on MacArthur Drive are narrow. Some curbs are in disrepair, and there's no connection to Apache Boulevard where residents would have access to transit and other facilities. Streets, traffic speeds were not safe for pedestrians and bikers, especially kids, the elderly, and those with disabilities. The Loop 101 created a large barrier and cut off the Victory Acres neighborhood from Escalante. And so they suggested a signalized crosswalk to safely reconnect those neighborhoods for pedestrians and especially, again, kids, elderly, and disabilities to cross who don't have a car. There are no bike lanes, and even though it says there's a bike path, and they feel that those are needed to be safe and that the streets are in poor condition and dangerous, again, for those groups. And then here's part of the experience is looking at the lack of shade within the neighborhood, and that tree and shade structures are needed both along MacArthur Drive, and this picture shows Price Road. They need pedestrian scale lighting, that it's very dark at night. There's no places to sit and rest, and that art can be used to improve the pedestrian experience. And in regards to transit, again, those connections from the neighborhood to light rail are needed, especially as the city develops those properties along Apache, and bus shelters are needed for shade. And then Braden will wrap us up.
So in terms of next steps, where we're headed, we'll be finishing the pilot projects. So those will be wrapped up by this summer. We'll be closing out Equity in Action as a pilot project and are dedicated to passing on the lessons learned to the new Chief Equity Officer. That role has a tremendous opportunity to work with departments, to work with residents and nonprofits on advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and improving how we do equitable engagement and people-centered policymaking. We also, as Shauna mentioned, we have the opportunity to, after these pilot projects, revise this equitable engagement framework with any other additional lessons learned. We also have an opportunity to celebrate departmental efforts. I think one of the things I'm proudest about is how so many staff and departments have taken the work that started here and grown it into their own works. And so we see that with community services, with the Parks Equity Plan. We see that with additional work that Keely is leading with the mayor and staff, with the clerk's office, with the budget office. We see that with the work that the police department is doing on their traffic safety plan, as well as all of the engagement and work that human services is doing. So there are huge opportunities for us to all learn how we listen, how we create new ways of engagement, and how that leads to new policy outcomes and how that leads to new ways of working. So just deeply grateful to Mayor and Council for the funding and the leadership that has led to this last several years of work. And also just deeply grateful to our senior management, to Andrew Ching, to Tom Dunsing, to Rosa Chowsky, and to Stephen Metvin, for helping us through some of these difficult conversations and through negotiating how we do equitable engagement in government in new ways. That requires leadership, that requires vision, and really feel like we've seen that in the last several years to advance this work. And with that, Sean and I will take any questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Braden. Thank you, Shauna. Just a very quick comment on my end. I love the recommendations. I mean, everything. And first of all, I mean, thank you to all the community members that participated in that, frankly, doing the walkabouts, because those are things that I think absolutely need to be done. The sidewalks, I mean, that stuff has to be, I agree, we have to accelerate fixing those in whatever way that we can. And when I was first running for council back in 2005, 2006, I remember a lot of people, in the Victory Acres and Escalante area talking about there were years where our communities didn't even have sidewalks, where everyone else was getting sidewalks and great amenities, and we couldn't even get sidewalks and streetlights in our community. We kind of became a very forgotten part of the city. And so I think it's really critically important that we do whatever we can to add shade structures. One only had to look at the photo that was taken of everyone standing on the corner and saw there was absolutely no shade whatsoever. And if someone's walking down that street probably anywhere from June 1st, probably until the end of September, end of October, it's going to be unbearably uncomfortable and frankly dangerous. And so from my perspective as well, whether it's fixing the streets and the roads, adding additional shade structures, the bike lanes, I thought was also a very intuitive point, saying, we talk about this area being a place that's part of our Bicycle Boulevard program where people are actually told to ride your bike. But if there aren't any actual bike lanes or any safe way for people to get around using their bikes through those communities, I think then, we're sending people into a very unsafe and potentially dangerous situation. So I really do agree. I think it's long past time that we try to begin to put some of those amenities, frankly, things that other parts of our community have and have had for so many years. But I think we have to really do whatever we can to accelerate all the fixes and upgrades in those neighborhoods, because frankly, the folks in those neighborhoods deserve it. And I think we should make good on that promise. Any other council members? Councilmember Garland?
I love the walkabout that you did. I think that's so important for us to get out there and actually see the community. And I agree with everything that you have written down on here. As just running for office just recently, a couple years ago, but out there with my team, I saw everything that they are talking about in there. So I think it's really important that we as council members are making decisions not just on paper and getting information that's in front of us, but by people that are actually walking and out there in the neighborhoods. So I just want to say that I appreciate you guys doing that. I think that's really important. When I got on council and I was reading some paperwork and it talked about equity in action, I'm like, what the heck is equity in action? What is this group? And I looked online. it nowhere near gives the information that you guys have given in this presentation. So if I were to look online to see what Equity in Action is, and you look on that website, that it does not give the glory of what you guys are doing and how important that is to our community. I'd love to be able to see that you guys put this slide presentation on there, or really add more information on there so that people can learn about Equity in Action and what we're doing, even though it sounds like that this program specifically is coming to an end. This is something incredible that the city of Tempe has done, and I really think that we need to get out there and give some more information for people to read about it. So if we can, that would be really great. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, Councilmember Garwood, and Councilmember Cubie.
I don't want to repeat what you have to say. Great suggestion about adding more information to the website. I just want to thank Vitalist Health Foundation because they invested in this program, and it was from the Innovation Fund, you remember, and then they matched the original investment. So thank you to Vitalist Foundation, and thank you so much, Shauna, for all your work, and Braden, of course.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Any other comments, Council?
Great stuff.
Great. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Next up, item 3E, Tempe Voter Turnout Charter Review. And I guess, Madam Clerk, I will look to you.
Give me just a minute. I'm going to test this and see if we can get it to display really quick from this position.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, it's working. So Councilmember Cubie had requested a little over a month ago a presentation, and council concurred. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview of what our voter turnout looks like and what charter sections are applicable and what future action council might or might not be interested in. So the performance measure is strong community connections, 2.15, feeling invited to participate in city decisions. Local elections are huge. They impact the quality of life, safety, and a variety of other issues that impact our residents and visitors daily. So I do think this is very important. This is a table showing voter turnout, but I do have a chart on the next page that I believe is more illustrative. So in this chart, you can see our November bond elections, and we have 80%, 75%, 68% voter turnout because we're on a ballot with either a president or a governor. Our elections run March and May, and we do have lower voter turnout, as you can see from the graph. And that's been a trend that's been fairly consistent. We get a little bump for the mayor when he ran, and we had 30.71%, so that was pretty awesome. So the charter provisions that are affecting the timing are in Article 7, Section 7.01. Although the way our charter is written, technically our first election should be in April, but that does not align with the consolidated election dates. So we hold our March election and then May for a runoff if needed.
Can I ask a quick question? Are we technically okay having elections in March if the charter specifically outlines April?
I'll let Sonia answer that question.
All right, I just had to ask, you know.
Sadly, I don't know the answer, but I promise you I will find the answer.
Sounds good. That was one of the things that popped out at me. So I just want to, but I appreciate you looking into that. So thank you both.
So if we did decide we wanted to have it in April, Tempe would be responsible for the election, the ballot printing, the tabulation, and it would take a lot of staff to do that. So I'm pretty sure that's why we're aligning with March and using Maricopa County elections, but that's a great question. So most Arizona cities and towns do hold their mayor and council candidate elections during even-numbered years, and they do the August-November cycle. Only charter cities can really step outside of that, is my understanding. And we do have a few entities that do have off-cycle elections. Douglas has a March primary in the even year and a May in the even year. Phoenix does a November primary on an even year, and if a runoff is needed, they have it in March of the odd year. Prescott has an August primary during an odd year, and a November general during an odd year, which would not be a gubernatorial or a presidential election. Tempe, that's us. And then we have Tucson that does their August primary in the odd year and a May general in the odd year. They do have a partisan election, so they have to have both elections. So the other piece of the charter, if we decide we want to look at the charter, are the citizen initiative signature requirements. And this has been something that's been mentioned before. We require a percentage of the voter registration, whereas most cities are requiring a percentage of the voter turnout. So that is a very different number. Referendums do not allow us to step outside of that. The state statute's very restrictive and does not allow even charter cities to change that. But for initiatives, there was permissive language, and that's why we are where we are. But that's another piece of the charter that if council chooses to look at deeper, that might be something to look at. And just as a note, it was passed in 1968 when they increased the initiative signature requirements. I can't speak to what that motivation was, but you guys know your history. I don't know why anyone would want to make it harder for the citizens, but that's what happened. And then timeline, if we decide we do want to have a charter election, we have to notify, we have to have a call of election 150 days in advance of the election, and we have to have ballot language available 135 days before the election. So we could either push for November if council wants to, or we could move it towards 2024 when we have a general plan election and a bond election and a candidate election that would not cost us any additional money other than publicity pamphlets. So from there, it's kind of up to council.
Okay. One quick thing I'll say before opening it up to council, because I did have a conversation with Councilmember Adams prior to the meeting just to ask her what her position was, and she said she was not in favor of moving to a November election. She wanted to stay on the current March-May cycle. So I just wanted to just provide that to my colleagues, and she gave me authorization to make that comment. So with that, I will open it up to other colleagues. Vice Mayor Keating.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Carla. I really appreciate it. I'm not in favor of any election changes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Mayor Keating, we go Councilmember Garland, then Councilmember Cubey.
I looked at a lot of the information, and I did my own unofficial survey of neighbors and friends and asked them about it, and everybody that I spoke to likes that we do something different and unique and that we really stand out and really focus on just the city of Tempe for our elections. And I'm glad because that's kind of the way that I feel I've read through some of the stuff that we've received. And I like that we have ours set up the way we have it. But I do think if we're going to look at trying to make sure that we're doing things right, that we look at changing what our charter specifically says about the the April date, and changing it to March if that's what we're going to stay, so that we are staying in line with what we're supposed to be doing. So I would suggest that we maybe consider that.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Garland. Councilmember Cubey.
So first, talking about moving the election date, and then I'll talk about the citizen ballot initiative. So from Carla's historical data, thank you so much. We do see a dramatic increase in turnout. And to be clear, city elections would be held on the first Tuesday in November, beginning in 2024, if we referred it. We joined the vast majority of other cities in Arizona. I think Douglas is one of the main holdouts. So we would, newly elected council members would begin their term 2, not 4 months later, which is unusual. People are elected in March, they don't start to serve until July, really August, because we have July off. So it cuts in half that 4-month gap between being elected and serving in office, which I think is important. It's really a 5-month gap because of that July break. And I think it cures a weakness in our system. So newly elected council members they generally have to wait about a year to have a say in the budget process. And people elected in November, sworn in January, it would give the council members most recently elected, so you could say most representative of Tempe, a voice in the budget process. Tempe, well, we talked about this, has been in violation of the charter, so we should think about cleaning that up in any case. We haven't had a general election since 2012, but it will eliminate the need and extra cost to taxpayers of having a primary and a general election, because it could just be the top 3 win. And then current CMs, this isn't a for or against argument, but it's just a fact. Current CMs, those elected in 2020 and 2022, would have 6 months added to their term, which that's happened before, right? I think that happened in 2014. I had 6 months taken off my term. I'm the only one probably, well, David Shapiro too, but because we shifted the elections to August and then back to March. We'd eliminate the need to continually explain to people about the March election date. And if you're talking about your neighbors in South Tempe, maybe they're more aware of that. I don't know. But I mean, I know having knocked on doors, you continually have to explain to people, even people who are very knowledgeable about government, just like, March, what? The ballots drop and I'm getting them in Valentine's Day? Like, that makes no sense. There's also different voter registration days, so that sets up a confusion. We would fall into the county and statewide narrative and U.S. narrative of encouraging people to vote in November. We wouldn't need to have the continual PR and press and just like, vote, your ballots are coming, you vote in March, you vote in March. It would be, you're joining this, this continuum where we all know to vote in November. We'd also eliminate the visual clutter of signs from the end of December to March 15th every 2 years. I always ask residents, like, please, have sympathy, because people are running for office who've never run before. They need to get their name ID out. But in fact, you condense the clutter of signs to a specific time, around October and November every 2 years. So I want to just talk about some of the cons and counters. And I so appreciate you guys listening to me. I think it's important to have policy discussions and not just like no, yes, no. We should just, be able to talk about this. So here's one of the cons I've heard. There'll be more clutter and competition with candidate mailers. I think it's true. I think it's true. If we move the elections to November, there'll be more clutter and more competition. But mail is always cluttered. Voters are never keen to read through all the campaign mail, no matter the time of year. We know people, if you just see your name, it's something what you're as a candidate you're looking for. I've heard the criticism will be more expensive for candidates, as there'll be a greater electorate to inform. And I have to say that's true. It's a fair criticism, but I don't think we should be making decisions based on candidate self-interest. My other counter is that the larger expense of mailing can be countered by, you're going to be engaging voters. It's a good thing. You're going to engage voters, and you're going to, and they'll become better informed in city issues by those mailers if they actually read them. But also, you have the opportunity to actually knock on doors and talk to the voters. For those that, let's see, all right, this is the main argument, though, I want to make. You'll hear the argument. I've heard it time and time again. I've heard it many times. You'll hear the argument that voters in March are better informed on city issues. So what this really means is that the small number of voters who vote in March, which is, could be 20%, are the handful who actually know that a March election is happening. They're the people who engage with the city on a regular basis on a variety of issues. But what we've learned from Equity in Action just tonight from that presentation is that many of our most vulnerable and marginalized communities face challenges and barriers that keep them from actively engaging with us. And we've seen this also in our community survey, with a dissatisfaction with the amount of engagement and knowledge about what's going on council. And as Shauna said, thank you, Shauna, she said deep participation for those less involved. That's what Equity in Action was about, deep participation for those less involved. So we've learned from Equity in Action that the information we think we're sharing with the whole community in some ways is not accessible to everyone. We hear continually, you need to go where people are. And the entire goal of Equity in Action, we've learned, is to identify the barriers we've inadvertently created. I don't think we're creating them on purpose, and make it easier for people to receive information about city issues and give us feedback about those issues. And until we can honestly say we've done that, we should make it as easy and accessible as possible to vote and participate in our governmental process, moving our elections to a time when people know to look for those elections. This action would tell our residents that Equity in Action was more than just an exercise, and what we really learned from community members really must be put into practice, fundamentally. So fundamentally, I contend this is and I sense I may not be winning on this issue. It's not about winning. I really wanted to bring this up before I left council, but it is a pro-democracy initiative. In a time where we're facing increased challenges to our democracy, it will have the effect of engaging more people in local government. And isn't that what Equity in Action is all about? And Carla, thank you for that time series, because we show we can guarantee there will be increased participation in our city elections. We have it every time we have a ballot initiative in November. So that's my argument for moving the elections to November. About the citizen ballot initiative process. It's interesting because you all know you've collected ballot signatures. We all know we have to get way more often than we need because they can be challenged and they need to be verified. under the system we currently have, where the denominator is those that are registered, is there some, wait, sorry. Okay, okay. Those who are, so the denominator are those that are registered to vote, not those who voted in the last election, right? And we're the only city in Arizona that does this, and it happened in 1968 when the John Birch Society was very strong in that region, by the way. We've looked into that a little. But because you have to get extra signatures, you actually have to get more signatures on a citizen ballot initiative than you need votes. And imagine if Arizona were like this, if you needed, say, 2 million signatures, I don't know the exact number, just to get on the ballot, it would be thought of as the most anti-voter process ever, right? And so you need to get more signatures to get a ballot initiative on than you need votes. That is a startling fact. And again, the other fact is that we differ from any other city in Arizona. So at minimum, I hope you guys would consider that we should make a change to the citizen ballot initiative. It still would mean like 6,000, you'd still need to get, because of overage, 6,000, 7,000. We all know it's not easy to get 6,000, 7,000 signatures in a city where there are, 83,000 voters. It's still difficult. It's still a hurdle, but it's not an impossible hurdle. And so that's why I would argue that we really should democratize our ballot initiative process. So there's two issues on the table, and I'd love to hear what the rest of you think. And I'd love to debate it if you so choose.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Councilmember Cubie. Councilmember Arenado Savage.
Awesome. Oh, dang it. What happened to my stuff? Where'd it go? Oh, thanks. All my notes are right there. Thank you. Hey, Carla, thank you for getting the information, because it was really kind of enlightening just a little bit to look at the numbers. And I thought one of the things that I noticed here, and I understand what Councilmember Cubie is talking about voter turnout, but what I got from this information is our voters really turn out when we have bond elections. I mean, that's pretty much where the numbers are. And the one year that I actually ran, and we ran in November, those numbers were not any higher.
Yeah, so I do have an explanation for that. At that time, Tempe had its own ballot because you guys were all male. You weren't sharing a ballot with a federal or statewide race, so that's probably what impacted it.
Well, I mean, they all got it, I guess, to me.
And I think you were unopposed.
What's that?
You were unopposed as
No,
well
I've
at that
never
point,
been
weren't you?
unopposed. Oh, on that second one.
Yeah, on the second one.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. So what I'm saying is it doesn't change the people that are actually turning out. I mean, as much as I thought it would, look a lot different than what I'm seeing, so it definitely doesn't. But I I don't want to really debate it, Lauren, and I appreciate your passion and stuff, and really respect what you have to say, and I know you're committed to what your beliefs are, but I really like the system that we have now, and I believe that's what's right for our community in regards to keeping this nonpartisan, being able to reach the voters and just be able to talk about city, local issues. And I do agree with Councilmember Garland, if there's language that we need to clean up, and I think Sonia will point us in the right direction, I certainly support that. So thank you. But thank you, Carla, for doing the work.
Thank you, Councilmember Arenado Savage. And I know to Vice Mayor Keating, when you spoke, I know your statement was you're not in favor of making any election-related changes, so I'm assuming that covered both items, or my?
Yes,
Correct.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And I explained that position when we first brought this up. So
Got it.
in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat it.
So I just want to make sure I had it correct, so thank you, appreciate it. Any other council members' comments or questions?
Well, Mr. Mayor, from others about the ballot initiative, I didn't hear reasons for, let's talk about what are the reasons for not making the ballot initiative requirements the same as every other city in Arizona. I'd love to, defend
I'm
it.
not going to debate you, Councilmember Kuby.
But it's important, don't you think it's important for residents to know or understand where you stand or why? It's just.
They know where I stand. I'm against it. I'm not going to tinker with our elections now. There's no reason to. I believe it's unpopular, and I don't believe there's consensus to move forward with either of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Great, okay. Any other council members' comments or questions?
I agree with Vice Mayor.
Okay. Because I've more or less, I'm at consensus, especially when it comes to the moving the election to November already. Is there anyone else who has any further comments, or? All right, so one thing.
Mr. Mayor, did Councilmember Adams say anything about the ballot initiative process?
She did not speak to me directly about that one, so.
Okay.
So yeah, I should make another note. So from my perspective, going to the first one, which is regarding the voter turnout, I would be in favor of keeping the elections in March, May, And there are a few reasons why. I've actually had a chance to really think about this over the last couple of weeks since this was brought up. And I actually totally see there are a lot of very good points, Councilmember Cubie, to what you're talking about in terms of elections tend to be on sort of August primary, November general cycles. And so perhaps people are going to, we don't have to spend additional money or time trying to educate people about a March, May election. So I actually totally see that. Part of the issues, though, that sort of came up in my mind over the last couple of weeks as I had some time to think about this was, one is that I think for the people who are running in council races, which are typically down ballot races, which are sort of, many times I know the ballot I fill out in November of an even year is a 4-page ballot where many times I'm the kind of person, I vote for everything, even all the judges. But I know, but there are a lot of people who don't ever really get to the back of that ballot. They might get to the front of it. They vote for governor or U.S. senator, Congress, whatever it happens to be, and then they just sort of stop. And so the beautiful thing in some sense about having a March, May election is that you actually have the ability for people to have only maybe a couple of issues, council members, mayor, maybe a special election of some sort, but it really is a very focused ballot that people can really kind of hone in on. Whereas I do worry that if you have the election in November, you could have nonpartisan council candidates more or less getting lost in the shuffle of a 4-page ballot that people might not get to the end to. Other thing I thought of too was when it comes to even just the way that we do our budget, our fiscal year budget runs from July to June. And so if we have regularly begin to have elections that actually, where people would actually get sworn in January, they're coming in 6 months into the current budget cycle, and then they need to then spend a lot of time quickly getting up to speed because the previous council has already been discussing this for about 6 months and sharing their priorities and a lot of their goals and objectives. So for the person starting in July, you have a chance to really, the previous council has just passed the budget, you have an opportunity to shape that budget with your new colleagues, but for new people who are coming on, like if Councilmember Garland and I had just come on in January as opposed to July, the other council members up here would have already had a 6-month running head start. And for us maybe to go back in and add additional things or change things or even to debate our colleagues, it might have put us at a little bit of an intellectual disadvantage because we weren't already here and didn't know about a lot of the conversations that took place before we actually got here. And the last thing I would also say, though, about this too is the cost. Right now, we've talked about ways to, and I know Councilmember Cubie, you and I worked on this a lot when I was still on the city council, was talking about ways to really, and Councilmember Navarro as well, to lower the barrier to people running. Because in a lot of other cities, the election contribution limits are like $6,500 for, and pretty much unless you're an incumbent, you're not going to get incumbent or connected to a lot of independently wealthy people. Most people are not going to write you a check for $6,500. It's just way too much money. And so we obviously lowered the number to an amount that pretty much, not anyone, but a lot of people can actually give, and it really levels the playing field so that developers and land use attorneys and lobbyists and people who might be independently wealthy don't have the ability to just pour a lot of money into someone's campaign and really cut a lot of regular people out of the election cycle who might not be able to give that astronomical amount of money. But my concern is when you go to a November election, you then have a situation where the council candidates are now competing with the people running for the U.S. Senate and the United States Congress and governor and all of those high dollar races. I mean, U.S. Senate races now are projected to cost upwards of $10 million per race. And the challenge, of course, becomes for that now I'm running for the city council or running for mayor, and I'm probably on a $40,000 to $50,000 budget, and I'm trying to compete with all the direct mail and the signage that's going up for people who are raising $10 million. And quite honestly, I'm concerned that we might therefore then get lost in the shuffle of all that, a lot of the city issues and the ability to get our message across, other than going door knocking. I mean, frankly, I think that is the most successful way to get votes, is going door to door, talking about your platform and asking people for their support. But I think that when it comes to a lot of the other things, the digital advertising, the direct mail, the yard signs and everything else, there is a possibility. I'm not saying, I don't want to be over dramatic about it. So I would say, Councilmember Cubie, I could be totally wrong about this, but I do believe there is a potential that you could be, that the council candidates who are running much lower dollar races and lower visibility races could get more or less drowned out by the people who are running for federal offices who are going to be raising gobs more money than we could probably ever hope for. So that's those are sort of, that encapsulates my thoughts regarding, why I'm in favor of keeping the elections in the springtime. But I would be interested, as other council members have talked about earlier, in looking to clean up some of that language. If the charter says April, I believe we either probably need to move, and I'll leave it to our city attorney, Sonia Blaine, because she went to law school and I most certainly did not. I got knocked out pre-law when torts came up, and I realized I was not cut out for it. So I respect you. But my perspective, right, on that is I would like to make sure that we are right with our charter in some way, shape, or form, that we either move the election to an April, May, or we actually correct the charter to make sure that it actually specifies March so we're not out of bounds with what our voters have frankly previously codified. I think that's important. Also, I just have one quick question. I want to go to Councilmember Navarro, and I can come back and talk about my second opinion. But
No, go for it.
Regarding the ballot initiatives, so we talked about, maybe roughly 7,000 signatures if the change was made to get an initiative on the ballot. What is it currently now to get an initiative on the ballot?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's 5 digits. I think it's 13 or 14,000 signatures.
So it's about double,
right,
basically.
Verified, and then,
verified signatures, correct.
Figured out that you want to get 16 or 17,000, which pretty much is what kind of votes you need to get it passed.
Right. No, and I mean, once again, I can see both sides of this issue. There's a part of me that actually says, the ability to let citizens get more things on a ballot. I can understand that increasing, sort of democracy. My only other concern, though, is that there have been times where we've seen groups do things that, frankly, trying to insert, more partisan issues, or frankly, things that I would probably label to be not the right thing. I'm going to try to not, go into full hyperbole here, but I do worry that for every group that might have the ability to get something good on the ballot that might actually help our city and move us forward in the right direction, if the signature amounts are drastically lower, you're also going to have a lot more groups potentially putting on things with, with additional dark money or other independent expenditure funds that, frankly, that none of us probably sitting up here would actually want or, frankly, sanction or support. And so I think that it's sort of a double-edged sword. You could invite more people to do things that might be positive, but you also could be inviting people to, frankly, do things that could be negative and that might actually set the city back 20, 30 years, which I would be also very much concerned about. But
to that point,
yes,
if there are a lot more signatures required, that it sort of gives the better play to an independent expenditure group, because they're the ones who can afford to invest and get those signatures paid for, right? So it sort of argues, it kind of goes both ways. I mean, it's a fair criticism, but it could go that other way. And then the idea that you have to, it's a lot of signatures. It shows a lot of intent. But ultimately, this is about letting the voters decide, right? It's about letting the voters decide on a referral. They can vote it yay or nay, but they can also decide yay or nay on a ballot initiative that, makes Tempe, the peanut butter capital, makes some, ridiculous statement and puts it on there. Like, well, the voters can vote against it. So ultimately,
peanut butter is like my favorite thing in the world. So when you said that, I got very happy. So I just wanted to say.
But ultimately, yeah, there could be it could make it slightly easier for a truly grassroots group to get something on the ballot, but that's for the voters to decide whether to support it or not. And that's why I feel like a lot of these election referrals, and you and I have been at the center of referring a lot of ballot initiatives to the ballot, and they've been really successful. But ultimately, as candidates, we're kind of conflicted, and we should really defer to the voters to decide.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think you said it perfectly with the wrap up, and I agree with you on it in respect to the time, because I know we have another agenda item. I know we could debate this all night. I would like to request we move on.
Okay.
Can I just say one more thing? I really appreciate you, Mr. Mayor, that you're I'm sorry, Joel. I'm sorry we're taking time to talk about something that's an important policy issue, and that was precisely my point. I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being willing to engage in a policy discussion, because these are important issues, and we've been living through a time of COVID where we've been all on a screen and maybe showing our face, maybe not, and I think people are feeling a little less engaged in their local government. So I think it's important to have these discussions and to stand and make, you've made really good points that I hadn't thought of before, frankly, related to the November elections. I respect them, and I really enjoy the opportunity to talk about it. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Appreciate you bringing these items up for conversation, and thank you for the council for engaging in the conversation. Really appreciate it. Let me next go to item 3F, which is Double Butte Cemetery needs. And, Craig, I said earlier you almost dodged it, but then I forgot that you were here anyway, so,
Yes, please. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Craig Hayton, Deputy Community Services Director with Parks and Recreation. Appreciate the opportunity to provide a high-level overview of some of the needs that exist over at the Double Butte Cemetery. Want to start off with a couple thank yous. The Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation has certainly been kind in communicating some of the needs that exist out there, but has also, on their own commitment, has initiated a study with Logan Simpson Design on some of the elements that I'll talk about a little bit later on. But I do want to say thank you to them for their care and compassion for the W Cemetery, a really important part of what is a diverse recreational system and our city as a whole. Second, the Tempe Historic Preservation Office has, with Dr. Zach Lechner, Robbie Aaron, and Ambika Adhikari, have been very kind to give me their time with reviews for today. And then also, we got a wonderful team with Cynthia Yanez, who is really the first point of contact for some families really going through the most difficult times. She's been a wonderful steward and just an ambassador for our organization for decades. And we have a great team out in the field that works hand in hand with community members as they go through a really difficult time, and Mike Jones and Mike Clark as they work through that. So I just want to thank them and recognize their efforts as we get started. So first, just want to frame this performance measure 3.16. What we're going to talk about tonight really is the stewardship of what is an important element within the larger parks and recreation system. And today's presentation, I will briefly run through a quick description of the W Cemetery, and then it's really tough to synthesize 150 years down into one slide, but I'll do my best, just highlighting the importance and seeing the trajectory from something that is almost 150 years old. We'll go through needs at a high level at 3 different points. First, we'll talk about the restoration of the historically significant elements within the cemetery. Second, we'll talk about more asset management related repairs and replacement for asset management for existing infrastructure. And then what other opportunities exist in improvements and some enhancements within the cemetery. We have some recommendations really to spur council discussion at the end of the presentation. Cut it down to 48 minutes, so we should, just kidding.
You got this, Craig, don't worry.
I'm kidding. All right, so first, just a brief overview. That's right, from here. So the Tempe W Cemetery really is unique. The picture says it all. It really is the merge of 2 distinct cemetery looks. We've got what is called the Victorian era pioneer graveyard in the foreground, kind of known as the desert graveyard portion of the cemetery. And then we have a post-World War II area of tree lawn cemetery in the back, what is, as you see on the map on the right-hand side, it is that western front closer to 48th Street. So really unique within the Salt River Valley that we have these 2 forms of cemeteries coming together. And as we look at the history of the Double Butte Cemetery, we can see that from a Tempe perspective, this really lines up with the recent sesquicentennial. We have our first recorded burial in 1876. Through the remainder of the end of the 19th century, the cemetery was actually formally established with an association. It was volunteer run until 1958 when that actually was transitioned over to the city of Tempe. We actually ran out of burial spaces in 1994, which led to a master plan completed by Logan Simpson in 2002, which led to the expansion of the current W Cemetery to include 2 new areas, the Sunrise and Sunset areas, as well as some other enhancements that were included back in 2008. The Tempe Historic Preservation Office put forward a proposal for a historic designation and listing that was accepted by Mayor and Council in 2012. And then, as I mentioned previously, in 2022, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation has been kind enough to raise funds for an initial assessment. We know that there is an assessment that could happen really cemetery-wide. At this point, with the funds that they have available, they really are focusing on those landscape elements within that oldest section in the Pioneer of the Desert sections of that. So if there's additional funds that come across, they'd be more than happy to look at some of the gravestone elements and what we could be doing to restore those elements. But at this point, they're focusing with their assessment, and we'll talk a little bit later on just about the landscaping elements. So I've mentioned previously that we've identified needs in 3 categories. So the first is the conservation of historically significant elements. The site is 150 years old, and certainly a lot of the elements from the late 1800s are going to be in rough shape just based on being out in the elements. We have antiquated gravestones, curb fencing around some of the initial burial plots. These were family plots that were usually multiple spaces. And then the general landscaping needs that exist out on site. If you've been out to the W Cemetery, you know there's not a whole lot of shade. In fact, our urban forester recently, with his team and the contractors, removed over 100 different stumps, either ground or removed, just over the past year. We have replaced some trees, but at the order of about a dozen. So we know that some existing needs are certainly there, but we also want to make sure that we're following what has been historically accurate on site as well. And then there's an Armed Forces Memorial, the bottom center picture. We want to make sure that we're being respectful as we look at some of the needs potentially for that important element as well. And then next, again, following what is a typical asset management approach, and some of these items do certainly cross over with the historically significant items, but we know, as I mentioned previously, trees and landscape elements, some of the pictures just highlight what is lacking on site. And a key element, as we've noticed in many of our different landscapes, a lot of the issues that really show themselves in the downfall of some of the trees is some of the irrigation infrastructure that really needs to be worked on. This is a flood irrigated site. We have ditches, we have scuppers, which are those pipes that translocate water from one area to another. As you can see in the pictures as well, we have asphalt roadway that's in need of some repairs. And then, though the maintenance building on the right side looks like it's in good condition from the outside, it does have some needs interior. And then we'll make a recommendation on the next slide that there's also an opportunity to add to expand some of the storage opportunities as well within this building as well, so that we can actually house some of the equipment that we utilize on site. And then our final needs are just what we're calling opportunities for improvement. We know that the I-10 is expanding to the west, up against that eastern border of the cemetery, so there's an opportunity to address potential noise mitigation concerns. As I mentioned previously, the building expansion, as a cemetery, what should be a serene area, there should be some areas and opportunities for beautification and reflection. And then those burial spaces that we added in 2008, the sunset section pictured in the top center, we anticipate in the next year being out of burial spaces in that location, and then the sunrise has a few more years to go. But we should probably consider whether we want to add some additional spaces within the cemetery moving forward. So that really overviews what we see as needs within the cemetery in those three categories. Our initial recommendations is we would love to participate and help evaluate some of the needs that have been identified through the Tempe Historic Preservation Funded Study. If there's an opportunity for us to add to that within next year's capital improvement program, we would love to anticipate seeing if we could help with that and provide a more comprehensive and robust study. And then we'd love to return back to Mayor and Council to discuss some of the identified needs, priorities, and then the all-important funding options of where we go from there. So I'll be happy to take any questions. Not quite 48 minutes, but close.
Well, Craig, thank you. Great presentation as always. I'm not trying to cut anyone short, but I'm fine with doing all three recommendations. I think they're all sound.
Okay.
We all good?
Wait,
Councilor
Mr. Mayor,
McKibben?
I don't know, you have some self-interest here since
Oh.
most of our mayors have their final resting place there, so
I'm
maybe
like,
you should
what do you
recuse
know?
yourself from this decision.
Have you seen the doctor's report on me? No. Councilmember QB is right. I should probably abstain. No, but sounds like we're all good with 1 through 3. So, yes, Vice Mayor Keating. Uh-oh.
Since
I'm
we're
worried.
taking a moment of levity, I will say, I actually went on a date to Butte Cemetery during quarantine. And it was so cool to see like all those historic names, which of course now is kind of an issue, but like, oh my God, I've seen that street or that school. So it was super cool to like see all that. And I saw Charlie Trumbull's, resting place and all the old gravestones. It was awesome. So I'm so glad that we're doing our best to renovate and kind of modernize everything. I will say that she later put me on blast on Twitter as the worst first date of her life.
Say, was there a second?
Yeah, how'd that date work out for you?
It did not work out well. It was the worst first date of her life. So, yeah, that's what happens when you're a Tempe nerd. Hopefully she's watching now. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Keating. Thank you, Craig. All right, item number 4, call to the audience. Next item on this agenda is call to the audience for committee of the whole items. There are no items ready for city council direction. I'll move on to item number 5, which is committee of the whole. Item 5A, items ready for city council direction or status update. We have none. Item 5B is council committees in progress, where updates as needed. Does anyone have any updates on items 5B1, 5B2, or 5B3?
For Cal, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yes, for the Sustainable and Livable Communities Committee, you'll be hearing more from Craig about this at a future meeting, but we do not have an IPM integrated pest management focused performance measure. And so Craig and staff are working on that, and we'll present it to council at a future time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilmember Cubie. Any other council members, any other items you'd like to add? All right, hearing none. Next item on the agenda is future agenda items. Council members may request that an agenda item be added to a future issue review session. And in accordance with the Arizona Open Meeting Law, there should be no discussion on the item other than to clarify the request. Oh, man. Does anyone have any future agenda items they'd like to add? No. Hearing none, Andrew's like, that is the most fun I've ever heard. All right, next item on the agenda is mayor's announcements and city manager's announcements. I have one, which is a proclamation here for the 53rd Annual Professional Municipal Clerks Week proclamation. Carla and Karen. So I'll go ahead and read this. Whereas the office of the professional municipal clerk, a time-honored and vital part of local government, exists throughout the world. And whereas the office of the professional municipal clerk is the oldest among public servants. And whereas the office of the professional municipal clerk provides the professional link between the citizens, the local governing bodies, and agencies of government at other levels. And whereas professional municipal clerks have pledged to be ever mindful of their neutrality and impartiality, rendering equal service to all. Whereas the professional municipal clerk serves as the information center on functions of local government and community. Whereas professional municipal clerks continually strive to improve the administration of the affairs of the office of the professional municipal clerk through participation in education programs, seminars, workshops, and the annual meetings of their state, provincial, county, and international professional organizations. Whereas it is most appropriate that we recognize the accomplishments of the office of the professional municipal clerk, now therefore I, Corey D. Woods, mayor of the city of Tempe, Arizona, do hereby declare May 1st through 7th as Professional Municipal Clerks Week in Tempe, Arizona.
Thank you, Mayor.
With that said, Carla, Karen, thank you for everything that you both do and that your office does every single day. You keep us in line with the law, and that is critically important. So thank you so much. Let's see. That is my only announcement, Mr. City Manager. Any announcements?
No announcements.
Okay. Well, given that, we are, the next work study session is June 2nd, 2022. Andrew, is that the last one of the year? Or I should ask our clerk, is that the last one of the year?
We have several June meetings. I just can't remember which ones.
All
are
right, I was
work
trying
study
to give
sessions.
people some hope up here. Anyway, we're adjourned at 7:23 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.